Boom, boom. The ground shook with the massive explosions as ice and fire magic clashed. In front of me was a giant dragon, the most powerful boss in this dungeon, and I was trying to defeat it all by myself, but I'm just a mage, far too weak to face such a boss on my own. My strongest attacks couldn't even scratch a scale off its body. Fear gripped me, and the next second the dragon's claw sent me flying. My staff slipped from my hand. Damn it! I was supposed to be the greatest mage in the world, and now I might die here. I hit the ground hard, feeling like every bone in my body was about to break. Suddenly, I heard footsteps approaching. I looked up and saw my teammates Naomi and Richard. One of them is my lover and the other is my best friend. But when I saw Richard's hand around Naomi's waist, my mind went blank. I didn't dwell on it and quickly asked them to help me out of there. However, they didn't move. They stood still, looking at me as if I were a joke. Why such cold expressions on their faces? Naomi walked over and held my hand, slowly taking off the storage ring from my finger. She said she never thought I would actually come for the Pisces amulet. She said it with such a casual voice. She added that I was a good man who would give her everything she wanted. Before I could respond, she took the ring from my hand, while telling me this way, she wouldn't forget my kindness. Wait, what did she mean by that? Why would she say such a thing? I reached out, trying to grab her, but the next second they started getting intimate and started kissing right in front of me. His hands were all over her. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This was all planned just to get rid of me. That's why we came to send you off, they said. I couldn't believe my eyes. I had treated them like family and they betrayed me. My life was slowly slipping away. As my heartbeat faded, everything went blank. I think I had died. But what I didn't know was that suddenly my chest began to glow red and the Pisces amulet slowly emerged. Bang, 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 wake up! The sun's already up! That familiar and annoying alarm clock blared again. Instinctively, I slapped it off, rubbed my head, and opened my eyes. The room looked unfamiliar yet oddly familiar, as if I had seen it somewhere before. Wasn't this my college dorm? Wasn't I just killed by the final boss? I quickly realized that my storage ring and all my elixirs and treasures were gone. The TV showed that it was August 7th, 2040. Had I been reincarnated? Reincarnated to the day before the game's launch 10 years ago? Was this real? I calmed down quickly and tried to figure out how I had been reincarnated. I remembered a rumor in the game The Eight Wastelands, which said that the ultimate artifact, the Pisces amulet, could grant a chance of revival. If that's the case, it must have been the Pisces amulet that brought me back to life. But my joy at being reincarnated was quickly replaced by anger. Fortunately, I hadn't put the Pisces amulet in my storage ring. Perhaps those two scumbags would have stolen it. Since I had this chance to start over, I wasn't going to waste it. I put on my clothes and walked to the mirror. My reflection glints with coldness. Before all this, I had just gone through the most tragic and desperate time of my life. The person I had loved for 10 years was having an affair with my most trusted friend. They even conspired to cheat me out of all my belongings, elixirs, and magical artifacts, eventually luring me into a death trap. Since the heavens had given me another chance, I vowed to make them experience the pain of betrayal and utter despair. Suddenly my phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Crazy Girl. I couldn't help but smile as I answered, "Crazy Girl, long time no see." On the other end, a lively and youthful voice replied, sounding a bit confused. She tells me that we had just had hot pot together yesterday. However, it seemed like she had gathered a lot of courage to make this call. She said there was something important she had to tell me, and that I needed to brace myself. I knew exactly what she wanted to say. The exact same day 10 years ago in my previous life, she called to tell me she saw Naomi kissing another guy. Not only did I not believe her, but we got into an argument and never spoke again. Hearing her voice again was such a relief. I apologized to her. She remarked that I was acting strange today. I laughed it off casually. Then I heard a heavy object drop on the floor, probably a dumbbell. She sounded worried and insisted she wasn't joking. Just like before, she told me about Naomi and the other guy. My reaction was calm, which made her even more anxious, insisting it wasn't a joke. I interrupted her, telling her I believed her but had something more important to tell her. Hearing my calm voice, she thought I might be on the brink of having some bad thoughts and tried to comfort me. However, I sat down in front of my computer and asked if she knew about the game 8 Wastelands. Of course, she had heard of it. The advertisements were everywhere. I told her I planned to become a full-time player in that game. This is because I knew that right now, people didn't realize 8 Wastelands wasn't just a simple virtual game. It would soon become a global sensation, and eventually merge with the real world in 5 years. No one knew exactly why, but it was certain that the abilities, artifacts, NPCs, and maps from the game would manifest in reality. The sooner one entered the game, the better the chances of gaining an advantage. From the other end of the line, her voice came again. Though surprised, she had heard about this game being developed by the most advanced cosmic-level AI. Remembering my achievements in other games, she believed I could also have a bright future in 8 Wastelands. I decided to move out of the dorm and rent a place to fully immerse myself in the game. She was happy to hear that I hadn't been feeling down and had found a new direction in life. Hearing this, she felt relieved. We chatted for a bit more, but then I suddenly thought of something and quickly asked her not to hang up. I had spent all my money on Naomi over the past few years, and I needed to buy equipment to play the game. I had no choice but to ask her to lend me some money. She got angry, scolding me for spending so much on an expensive birthday gift for Naomi just yesterday to show off. With a huff, she hung up the phone. The more I thought about it, the more frustrated I became. Why couldn't I have been reincarnated a day earlier? Suddenly my phone rang again. It was a transfer notification and a voice message from her. She had sent me 10,000 yuan, saying it was her gym membership fee for several years. She warned me that if she couldn't go to the gym, she'd use me as her punching bag. I laughed and promised to pay her back. A few hours later, it was almost midnight. I lay on my bed, making final preparations. The next second, the ring on my finger emitted a dazzling red light, and after a quick scan, bound me to it. Soon, I saw a window pop up, saying the global beta test of 8 Wastelands had begun. I found myself immersed in the virtual world once again. 10 years later, I was back at the place where the dream started. A palace appeared before my eyes. A beautiful woman, glowing with golden light, floated gracefully in the air. Everyone's eyes were glued to her, unable to look away. These people didn't know, but I did. This was the goddess, also the cosmic-level AI, and this was the first stage of the game. It looked simple, but it had to be approached with caution. Players were whistling and making inappropriate comments, catcalling her, and asking her to come down. I rolled my eyes at their stupidity. The next moment, those disrespectful players were swiftly punished and thrown into a vortex. The others were clueless about what had happened, but I knew that any player who disrespected Goddess faced penalties, ranging from temporary confinement to permanent attribute reduction. I decided to approach her with sincerity. I stepped forward and cupped my hands in respect, and the goddess looked at me with a calm, approving expression. "Mortal, you seem decent. Do you truly wish to embark on the path of cultivation?" Without hesitation, I requested her to bestow a talent upon me. The next second, her fingertip pointed at me, and a golden light enveloped me. I remembered the useless talent I received in my previous life, which reduced item prices by 10%, a pointless perk. I wondered if I would get the same thing. However, I knew that an innate talent didn't determine everything. Even a bad start could be turned around with my knowledge of 8 Wastelands. A beam of light appeared behind me, and a window popped up in front of me. Innate talent acquired, defy fate. I was stunned. This talent was different from my previous life. The talent had 3 effects. First, every time I died, all my innate attributes would decrease by 10%. Second, upon breaking through to a new realm, all attribute rewards would be doubled. And third, each breakthrough would inevitably attract a tribulation. Failing to overcome it would result in the destruction of my soul. I was overjoyed. This talent was simply too overpowered. Although it comes with its dangers, great opportunities always come with great risks. If I didn't have the resolve to face them, then my reincarnation would be in vain. The talent has been bestowed upon you. Now you need to select your appearance, the goddess tells me. A window appeared, showing different hairstyles, similar to character creation in other online games. These basic models also had different attributes. I quickly browsed through them and found the one I wanted, the one with the highest charisma value. Unlike my previous life, where I deliberately chose an unattractive look to mess around, it wasn't until later that I knew that higher charisma and more attractive character looks made it easier to gain NPC favor. Otherwise, quests would be harder, and building rapport would be challenging. Next, the goddess asked me to choose my birthplace. A scroll unfurled, revealing a map divided into 4 regions. Each of these 4 states suited one of the mainstream professions in 8 Wastelands: mage, healer, sword cultivator, and body cultivator. I pondered for a moment before opening my personal information. Innate talent determined the upper limit for sword cultivators and body cultivators, while spirit determined the upper limit for mages and healers. The most important stat of them all, which is perception, was the key to learning rare and powerful skills, followed by charisma. But none of this mattered since all my base stat is maxed out. After reviewing my stats, I felt a surge of determination. If I chose to be a mage again, I would quickly become the best in the world. However, the weaknesses of mages were also evident. They were very weak in solo fights. I had chosen to be a mage because of Naomi, but this time, I would live for myself. I chose Muxian as my birthplace, a land known for sword cultivators. This time, I would carve my own path. As a golden light enveloped me, my body began to dissipate. The next second, I found myself in the newbie village of Muxian province. The place was bustling with new players. Some were holding signs asking for help, others were already looking for girlfriends, and many were marveling at how realistic the world felt. The crowd was just as lively as I remembered. Soon, an old man appeared and everyone rushed toward him, clearly the quest-giving NPC. Some of the players decided to go for Super Saiyan looks, while others chose Tomato Head, and another person went for Pumpkin Head. I'm sure they will soon regret their decisions, however. It's none of my concerns for now. Watching them, I decided not to follow the herd. Instead, I turned and walked in the opposite direction. It wasn't long before people realized the NPCs weren't responding to them or giving out any quests. A female voice called out from behind, asking me to wait. I turned to see a woman who introduced herself as Lady Kui, the owner of the village's tailor shop. She asked if I wanted to take on a quest. Every player around stared in disbelief, their mouth wide open. An NPC actively approached me. Some even thought I was an NPC because I was too handsome. Lady Kui quickly moved closer, mentioning that her husband had died 5 years ago, and she had been single ever since. She offered to help me if I found the quest too difficult. Was this the effect of having a maxed-out charisma? It seemed I could attract NPCs without even trying. If I wanted, I could build a relationship with this attractive widow. But the thought quickly vanished from my mind. Despite her enthusiasm, I politely declined, telling her I had important things to do today and would definitely come back to take on a quest another day. She seemed a bit disappointed but didn't insist. The other players, however, looked even more envious. Now, I needed to find this one place in the newbie village. I soon located a blacksmith shop. As I approached, a player informed me that there was a blacksmith inside who didn't speak a word. I cupped my hands in thanks and told him I was just browsing. Inside, several players were trying to talk to the blacksmith, a burly man who was hammering away at an unformed weapon. Seeing no reaction from him, they gave up and left. The blacksmith muttered to himself, "Why isn't this weapon taking shape today?" I approached and looked at the furnace below. Without saying a word, I grabbed the bellows and began to pump. The flames roared to life and the temperature soared. I knew this blacksmith was the key NPC in the newbie village. "Yes, the temperature was too low. The fire wasn't strong enough," he said, continuing to hammer the weapon. We didn't exchange any more words. He hammered, and I worked the bellows. The smoke cleared, and the blacksmith triumphantly held up the now-formed weapon. "Finally, it's done," he exclaimed. He turned to thank me, explaining that his apprentice was away, and there was no one to help him maintain the fire. He then pointed to the weapons behind him. "Choose one of these weapons. You can borrow it for a day, but you must return it afterward." While other new players might find this reward stingy, I knew the real benefits were yet to come. I picked a simple iron sword. The blacksmith laughed heartily and told me that if I could bring him 10 pairs of venomous fangs from the bamboo snake within a day, he would give me a special opportunity. After accepting the quest, I left the blacksmith's shop. Seeing the weapon in my hand, other players were visibly surprised. Many asked how I obtained the sword. I pointed to the shop and told them, "The blacksmith broke up. Just sing him a song to move his heart, and you can get a weapon too." Many believed me and rushed inside, starting to sing love songs to the blacksmith. I shook my head, laughing, and I went on with my day. Meanwhile, the blacksmith trembled, muttering, "Get the fuck out of here!" But most of the players thought it was part of the storyline. The next second, he swung his hammer, throwing everyone out. By that time, I had reached the bamboo forest. If one looked closely, one could see green snakes coiled around some of the bamboo branches. One snake quickly lunged at me, and I casually struck it down with a combo, easily dealing with the first snake and earning 3 experience points. I continued to slay several more snakes, gathering various items as I went. Surprisingly, from my experience, the drop rate for equipment in 8 wastelands was usually low. Yet these low-level snakes were dropping quite a bit of gear. Could it be related to my maxed-out luck attribute? Regardless, I continued with my quest. After dealing with all the snakes I could see, I came across a stone tablet that read, "Beware of the snake forest." Wiping the sweat from my forehead, I checked my loot. There's 10 pairs of venomous fangs, but also over 100 poison arrows, equipment, and some copper coins. Elated, I headed back to the newbie village to turn in the quest. I handed the 10 pairs of fangs to the blacksmith. He inspected them and nodded in satisfaction. "Thank you," he said, then handed me a letter. "This is the opportunity I promised." Holding the letter with the words "sword" on it, I knew this was my ticket to joining the sword sect. I asked the blacksmith if anyone else had received the quest for the letter. He told me that so far I was the only one. Satisfied, I realized I was ahead of the game while others were still exploring. Before heading to the sword sect, I had one more thing to do. I went to the bustling market of the newbie village and started selling some equipment. "Come and see, selling at a huge loss. Want to get stronger? Need equipment? The first blue snake bow in the server is up for auction. Highest bidder wins. Buy the thing so I can get married IRL." Soon a crowd gathered around me. The bidding quickly reached 1,800. Suddenly, a girl's voice shouted, "50,000!" Everyone turned to see a group of female players approaching. Ignoring everyone else, the woman walked up to me and said she could pay in cash or an online transfer. Smiling, I thought the price was good and was about to agree when someone else bid 60,000. A man approached, introducing himself as Wang Jinghao, the leader of the Millennium Guild. He had noticed that I had obtained equipment so early on and wanted to recruit me, thinking that I was a big shot. Other players recognized the Millennium Guild as well. I greeted him politely, but I remembered that in my previous life when I reached the top 10 on the Sky Leaderboard, they had approached me, however. I refused, causing Wang Jinghao to hold a grudge ever since. He took my advertisement seriously, thinking I was actually selling the weapon to get married, and even offered to cover all the wedding costs. I politely declined, shouldn't thought of a better excuse. However, Wang Jinghao didn't get angry and said he admired me. Just as he is about to take the bow and arrow from my hand, the woman bid 70,000. Neither was willing to back down, and soon the price soared to 300,000. I wondered which guild the girl belonged to, as she showed no regard for Wang Jinghao. Maybe I could use this to really put the squeeze on him. The girl soon raised her bid to 500,000. Wang Jinghao, feeling pressured, tried to assert his identity, with a hint of threat in his tone. The surrounding crowd was shocked that someone would spend 500,000 on low-level equipment. Crazy how people pay to win nowadays. At the same time, some speculated that the girl had a powerful background. Unfazed, the girl responded that the highest bidder should win and asked if Wang Jinghao thought he could monopolize everything he desired. His face turned sour. The girl looked down on him, knowing that compared to her young lady's family, the Millennium Guild was nothing. Wang Jinghao, feeling humiliated, decided not to buy the bow. He cursed internally about encountering such a crazy woman, but didn't want to spend 500,000 on a newbie weapon. As he was about to leave, I called out, "Brother Wang, please wait." He turned to me asking what else I wanted. Wang Jinghao, still quite angry, looked at me impatiently. I sincerely tells him that the Millennium Group had a big name, and if Brother Wang was willing to offer 500,000 on the spot, I would be willing to sell. In return, I wanted him to look after me in the future. Hearing this, Wang Jinghao's face lit up, and he agreed on the spot. His gaze towards me changed slightly, and he then burst into laughter, promising that he would help me if I ever faced difficulties. He immediately prepared to transfer the money. After receiving the money, I handed him the bow, though I thought to myself, leaving a good impression now will make it easier to scam him later. Wang Jinghao, clearly in a much better mood, laughed heartily as he left, throwing in a sarcastic remark to a girl, telling her to remember not to go against the Millennium Group in the future. The girl was first surprised and then angry. I watched him leave and chuckled to myself. Spending 500,000 on this piece of junk? What a freaking idiot. The poison arrows are limited and will run out after a few uses. Suddenly, the girl turned and glared at me, clearly upset. How can you go back on your word? Didn't you say the highest bidder would win? She shouted, pointing at me and calling me an opportunist. She stormed off in a huff. I thought for a moment and decided I should find a way to make it up to them. Outside the newbie village in the boar forest, the group of girls was preparing to level up. They decided to split up, each aiming to kill 2 boars. Soon the other 4 dashed off in different directions, and I suddenly appeared. "What are you doing here?" the girl asked me, clearly still upset. I didn't care at all, simply wanted to talk with her. She took a deep breath, calmed down, and allowed me to speak. What I didn't know was that, in her mind, she thought maybe because I had just met Wang Jinghao and might have been tricked by the Millennium Guild. Thinking this, she put away her weapon, ready to give me another chance. Seeing her sheathe her sword, I held up 5 fingers and told her that for 500,000, she could buy a top-secret piece of information. This information could give their guild an edge over the others. She didn't immediately accept. Instead, she asked why I didn't sell such important information to Wang Jinghao and reminded me that I asked him to look after me. Hearing this, I waved dismissively. Does he deserve it? I'm just playing along with him, tolerating his nonsense. I acted as if I was in a pitiable situation. To me, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and this girl seemed to dislike Wang Jinghao, so perhaps we could collaborate more in the future. She looked at me skeptically, as if my sudden change in attitude was too abrupt. I sent her my bank account number, assuring her that it would be a fair trade, and I wouldn't cheat her. She visibly struggled with her decision. In the end, she transferred the money to me. Easiest million in my life, I thought to myself. Even though I knew real-life money would become worthless later, I still needed it now to improve my life. Once the transfer was complete, I told the girl she should head back and complete the blacksmith shop quest instead. She was stunned for a moment, then got very angry and yelled at me, "You can't get a quest from the blacksmith's shop." What I didn't know was that she was about to attack me, thinking I was sent by Wang Jinghao to scam them. I explained that she needed to help the blacksmith pump the bellows for 5 minutes after he started forging to get the quest. She didn't say anything but still seemed skeptical. "If you don't believe me, just have one of your subordinates try it out. But make sure to do it discreetly so other players don't find out. Otherwise, the information will lose its value." I then took out the sect letter, which the girl immediately recognized. When I tell her that this was a quest reward, I had said all I needed to say. What she did next was up to her. As I turned to leave, she suddenly called out to me, still confused as to why I would sell such important information to her. I smiled and said, "I don't know, maybe because you're cute." She was stunned for a moment, and then blushed. Her gaze towards me softened. Suddenly there was a commotion behind her. "Help!" We both turned to see an enormous boar charging out of the forest. "Is this a boss?" the girls shouted as they ran. Instead of running, I stepped in front of them and told them, smiling, "You are in luck. This is the biggest boss in the newbie village." One of the girls asked in surprise if I intended to solo the Boar King. I smiled, extended my hand, and asked if I could borrow her sword. She tossed it to me, still skeptical if I could really do it. Without saying much, I thanked her, drew the long sword, and ignored the chatter behind me. "How is this possible? Isn't he just going to get himself killed?" "Right. He's probably just trying to impress Sister Ling by playing the hero." The girl, half angry, half embarrassed, tells them to be quiet. Their laughter grew louder. Just then, I leaped to dodge the Boar King's charge, slashing at its belly, and then its head. It quickly recovered and charged at me again. To my surprise, neither attack did any damage to it. Maybe I needed a new strategy. I got to the Boar King's rear but didn't attack. Instead, I sprinted in the opposite direction. The girls, watching from a distance, laughed at my desperate escape, commenting on how cute my running looked. Ling sighed. "This is all my fault for provoking him. At least he's a newbie, so dying a few times isn't a big deal, it's just a lesson." I soon reached a massive rock. As I neared the edge, I executed a 360-degree backflip, leaping over the Boar King. The Boar King wasn't so lucky. It crashed headfirst into the rocks, breaking one of its thick tusks. A -50 floated above its head as the fallen rocks caused more additional damage. The girls were stunned. They didn't know this was possible. The Boar King was still dazed, and I took the opportunity to strike its forehead with another slash. I continued to hack at it, each hit only dealing 8 points of damage, but all were critical hits. Quickly, the boss lost half its health. Finally, the Boar King recovered from its dazed state, looking furious. It roared and charged at me again. I dodged, not stopping my attacks. The immense pain drove the Boar King into a frenzy, making it charge at me wildly. I repeated my tactic, running in circles. Then, the Boar King crashed onto the rocks once more. Seizing the moment, I jumped onto its head and drove the iron sword downwards, piercing its skull completely. As the Boar King died, a flicker of flame flew into my body, granting me 70 experience points. Breakthrough! I reached the early stage of chi refinement. My talent triggered, doubling all my attributes. followed by a warm surge flowing through me, wiping away all fatigue. Entering the chi refinement stage meant stepping onto the path of cultivation and officially becoming a cultivator. My talent continued to trigger, granting me a random talent, the blood energy seed, which increased my vitality by 10% and could be upgraded 3 times. This was fantastic. The new talent increased my health, and with my attributes already doubled, I had a significant advantage. While other early chi refinement cultivators had 1,000 health, I now had 2,000 and more. Suddenly, a window popped up. Ding! Congratulations on completing the first kill of the newbie village boss in 8 wastelands. A global announcement will be made. Would you like to hide your name? I saw no reason to hide, so I chose not to. As soon as I made my choice, all the players heard an official global announcement. Everyone was in disbelief. How could someone kill the boss so quickly? Many thought I must be a big shot from a major guild. The girls also saw the message and learned my name. While everyone was discussing the announcement, I was busy inspecting the loot scattered on the ground. Thanks to my maxed out luck, a lot of gold coins dropped, along with 2 weapons and a movement technique book. Despite my excitement, I didn't forget about the downside of my talent. Since I just had a breakthrough soon, my tribulation would arrive. The system notified me that the tribulation would descend in 30 minutes. I quickly gathered my loot as the sky darkened, clouds forming ominously overhead. I felt a bit worried because if I failed, my attributes would permanently decrease. Realizing this, I knew I needed to rush to the sword sect. Perhaps someone there could help me. The girl suddenly stopped me, wanting to add me as a friend and suggesting they would buy all of my future equipment. I didn't have much time, so I accepted her friend request and dashed off. She seemed annoyed, wondering why I was running so fast. Did I find them scarier than the Boar King? I quickly arrived at the sect, the dark clouds still looming above. Knowing I couldn't withstand the tribulation on my own, I needed to find someone strong to assist me. I stood at the gate and shouted, "Disciple here to seek a teacher." There were many NPCs gathered around, likely disciples of the sword sect. I didn't stop, and they too noticed the sky suddenly darkening with flashes of lightning. Out of nowhere, a brilliant light appeared, a woman floating in the air. She wanted to know what was happening, and everyone bowed to her. She quickly identified the phenomenon as a tribulation and assumed it was one of the elders' direct disciples making a breakthrough. The elders exchanged glances, unsure of who it could be. At that moment, I shouted and rushed forward with the sword sect letter in hand. A bolt of lightning struck near me, catching the woman's attention. I held up the letter, asking her to help, knowing it was too early to face the tribulation alone. With a graceful wave of her hand, she enveloped me in a radiant glow. The lightning struck, but the glow formed a protective barrier that completely blocked it. After that single strike, the dark clouds quickly dissipated, and the sky cleared. I took a deep breath. The elders looked at me in astonishment. It was the first time they'd seen tribulation for someone at the early stage of chi refinement. To them, I was already a prodigy. Their shock soon turned into eager interest. They rushed towards me, each wanting me as their disciple. One female elder even grabbed my arm. Watching the elders vying for me, I forced myself to remain calm and composed despite how excited I was. Just as their arguments reached a peak, the girl who had helped me spoke up. "There's no need to fight. This new disciple will join under my guidance." Everyone fell silent upon hearing this. It was the sect leader herself speaking. "But the sect leader never accepts disciples," someone murmured. The girl approached me and asked if I wanted to become her only disciple and follow her to the inner hall for training. A window popped up, telling me that I had triggered the greatest opportunity of the Tianyan sect. I couldn't believe it, but without hesitation I accepted and bowed deeply. This was amazing. I had just joined the sect and already found such a powerful mentor. We proceeded to the inner hall, the core of the sect. My mentor instructed me to train here from now on, and assigned another sect disciple to bring me a newcomer's package and show me to my quarters. She then left, but not before instructing me to meet her in the main hall the next day. Although the girl seemed a bit aloof, my goal was accomplished. After waiting for what felt like an hour without any sign of the assigned disciple, I decided to explore the area on my own. Who knew what hidden quest I might stumble upon? Suddenly I came across a very unique-looking palace. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. I gulped hard only to be startled by a female voice demanding, "Who's there?" I hadn't realized I had wandered into the girl's palace. I quickly tried to apologize, but before I could finish, she turned and struck me with a powerful blow, instantly depleting 90% of my health. She scolded me for wandering into her palace without permission. Panicking, I explained that the assigned disciple hadn't arrived, and I was just trying to familiarize myself with my surroundings when I accidentally walked in. Rubbing my swollen cheek, I silently hoped this wouldn't affect her opinion of me. She sighed and decided not to punish me further. Instead, she handed me a pill and sternly warned me never to enter this place without her permission again. Looking at the pill in my hand, I realized it was a high-grade pill that would boost all combat attributes by 30% for 5 minutes and restore 3,000 health out of combat. I walked out of the palace but didn't take the pill immediately. I want to keep it for later. Instead, I returned to my original spot and soon heard footsteps approaching. It was the disciple my mentor had sent. A young girl in blue robes appeared before me. "Junior brother, come and pay your respects to your senior sister," she suddenly said. I bowed to her respectfully. "Greetings, senior sister." She was pleasantly surprised to see me playing along, and a system notification indicated that Nanggong Yue's rapport had increased by 10 points. I complimented her, saying, "Senior sister is not only as beautiful as a flower but also possesses such high cultivation. I am in awe." Hearing this, she became even happier, but suddenly blushed and turned her head away shyly, trying to hide her face from me while calling me a smooth talker. There's a saying that to advance in cultivation, one must not only practice diligently, but also mentor the art of flattery, I added, making her burst into laughter. The system notified me that her rapport had increased by another 5 points. I didn't expect her to be so easy to get along with. The relationship between players and NPCs could lead to different quests and opportunities, depending on the level of rapport. Typically, reaching a rapport level of 61 or above allowed physical contact with NPCs of the opposite gender, while a rapport level of 71 or above could potentially lead to becoming companions, cough the ones in bed. However, this was no easy feat. Many devoted players from previous lives had tried and failed. Suddenly, I uncontrollably coughed up blood. Alarmed, she looked at me and asked when I had sustained such severe injuries. I remembered the earlier incident and thought this might be an opportunity to gain some sympathy and benefits. Wiping the blood from my mouth, I truthfully recounted what had happened. The girl realized that her delay had caused me to wander around and get injured by the sect leader. She almost burst into tears, explaining that the sect leader had specifically instructed her, but she was too engrossed in reading a novel. Hastily, she took out a bottle of pills and handed it to me, apologizing profusely and blaming herself. I shook my head and said it was my fault for wandering around without permission. Before I could finish speaking, she looked at me with admiration, not expecting me to speak up for her even after being injured. Because of this, her rapport for me increased by another 5 points. After speaking, she handed me a green pendant. She generously gave it to me, and I took a closer look. This was a spiritual level equipment piece, defense plus 10, vitality plus 5, and it regenerates 1% of mana per second when out of combat. It also had a special skill, forming a 0.5 second mana shield during combat. "This jade pendant is top tier among spiritual level equipment." She laughed and said, "Of course, as your senior sister, I have plenty of good things." She then prepared to take me to my quarters. I couldn't believe how quickly I had acquired so many treasures, but I also reminded myself that this world overlaps with reality, and these NPCs should be treated as if they have real emotions and feelings. For now, this secret was known only to me. We soon arrived at a spirit gathering array, a place perfect for meditation and cultivation. This place allows spiritual energy to transfer into experience. Sensing the surrounding spiritual energy, she mentioned enviously that even her father's place only had a mystic level array. I was surprised to find such a high-level array in my living quarters. Typically, players would meditate offline or AFK here to gain experience, but this method was very slow. Could it be that my mentor had arranged this specifically for me? We talked for a few more minutes until the girl patted my shoulder and bid me farewell. I thanked her once again before beginning my meditation. Sitting in the spirit gathering array, I could feel the spiritual energy entering my body at a remarkable rate of 52 points per hour, thanks to my maxed out perception. This cultivation speed was dozens of times faster than that of an ordinary early-stage chi refinement cultivator. It seemed I could level up in just a few hours. I decided to log off and meet my mentor tomorrow. Back in the real world, I checked my phone and saw that my account balance was now over 1 million. And I am just getting started. Not long after, I called Ren Lan, and it wasn't long before she arrived on her motorcycle, following the address I had sent her. She took off her helmet, and her daily workouts had really paid off. Her physique was fantastic. As she was coming upstairs, I was already waiting for her at the door. She didn't understand why I called her so early. She had planned to go for a morning run at the track. Actually, I just wanted her to see my new apartment. "Is this the place you just rented?" "Wow, not bad," Renlan said casually as she walked in, taking a tour of the place and praising it non-stop. I told her it had to be good. After all, the rent was $6,000 a month. Hearing this, she jokingly said that I really knew how to enjoy life, asking if her membership fee was being wasted like this. What else could I do? I couldn't pay her back anyway, so I might as well spend it quickly so she wouldn't keep thinking about her money. I teased her on purpose. Hearing this, she leaped over the sofa in one swift move and grabbed me by the collar, sitting on top of me. It looked like she was really ready to use me as a punching bag. I was startled and quickly tried to explain, but she didn't stop, and I had to keep struggling. As a normal guy, from all that constant but unintentional rubbing, how do I say this? Well, my mushroom grew. She seemed to sense something, and her raised fist stopped in midair. Suddenly, her face turned red. She quickly jumped up and we both looked down, the atmosphere a bit awkward. "Lin, how dare you take advantage of me?" she yelled, raising her fist again. Moments later, there was a knock at the door. "Seems like my game pods have arrived." I asked them to wait a moment while rubbing my swollen cheeks. I told her that I had earned some money in the game and bought her a game pod as well, asking her to get off me. Soon, the delivery people carried the 2 game pods into my room. She knew their value and understood it could offset the money she had given me before. I knew that her college dorm wouldn't have space for them, and if I left it at her place, her dad would be so angry he would certainly destroy it. So I specifically placed it here and even prepared a room for her. She wasn't angry anymore. This was the latest model of the game pod, and she was eager to take photos and share them on Instagram. I shook my head, thinking money really does solve 99% of problems. Back in the game, it was already evening. My mentor arrived at the Spirit Gathering Array, praising my talent as the best she had ever seen. In just a few hours, I was about to break through again. I clasped my fists, pretending to be puzzled about why my cultivation had suddenly hit a bottleneck. I knew that each minor stage required special elixirs to break through, and I wanted to see if my mentor had any to help me. Her expression finally softened a bit, possibly because I had intruded into the palace yesterday and almost saw her naked. But soon, she took out a purple pill, explaining that it was a chi-gathering pill used as an offering, capable of helping me break through. I thanked her, knowing that such pills were only available in the best sects. Just when I thought she was about to give it to me, she crushed it instead. "Although your talent is exceptional, I'm worried you'll become someone who only knows how to cultivate without real strength. A true master needs not only cultivation and power, but also battle-hardened experience." I suddenly realized something, recalling my past life. I knew that cultivation could be boosted with pills and rare treasures, and attributes could be enhanced with equipment. But battle skills had no shortcuts. I nodded and told her, "A plant in a greenhouse is unfit to climb the path of immortality. Only a tree that grows in thunderstorms can attain eternal life." Hearing this, she seemed quite pleased. A window popped up. Veronica's rapport had gained 5 points. I hadn't expected that sharing my insights would gain me the sect leader's rapport. Although it wasn't much, it was a great start. Who knows what might happen in the future? Maybe something like this? No, I can't let my mind wander. I'm destined to become the world's greatest sword cultivator. I can't be distracted by romantic entanglements. Women would only slow down my sword-drawing speed. Then she took out another pill, instructing me to pick a difficult chi refinement level mission from the outer hall. If I completed it, I would receive this spirit-gathering pill. Before I left, she also gave me the scroll with the sect's core cultivation technique, the Tianyan Heart Sutra. This was a fundamental technique that all disciples of the Tianyan sword sect had to learn. The higher one's proficiency in it, the greater the benefits. This was one of the perks of being a disciple of the sect leader. While other disciples could also learn it, they had to complete many tasks to do so. But I didn't have to. I quickly made my way to the outer hall. There were already some scattered players there. It didn't surprise me, as some diligent players would naturally discover the blacksmith's hidden quest. However, I had already become the sect leader's disciple and entered the inner hall. "Handsome big shot!" a female voice called out suddenly from behind. I knew immediately it was directed at me. It was Ling. I hadn't expected her to join the sword sect, too. This was actually great. Having a friend around might come in handy later. "What a coincidence! You joined the sword sect, too?" I asked. "I prefer using swords, so naturally I chose the sword sect," she replied. We chatted for a while, but I eventually excused myself, explaining that I had a task to complete. Ling wanted to talk more, but I left quickly. The girl beside her laughed. "Sister Ling, even you can't sway him with your beauty. It looks like winning him over will be quite challenging." She blushed and started to argue back, but by then, I had already reached the quest board. There was a long queue of people waiting, so I took the opportunity to start reading the Tianyan Heart Sutra. It was soon my turn. I told the supervisor that I wanted to take on a quest. She suggested I choose one within my ability. I looked at the various difficulty levels of the quests. The ones at the bottom were the simplest, mainly gathering mundane herbs and only offering some experience points. I felt that was a waste of time. The tasks in the middle involved hunting low-level monsters, but those didn't seem challenging enough either. At the top, there was a golden plaque, which I immediately recognized as a hell-level quest. Without hesitation, I took that one. I knew that hell-level tasks were always special and came with rich rewards. Having already learned the Tianyan Heart Sutra, all my combat attributes had increased by 5%. Besides, I was familiar with the destination for this task. I could give it a try. The task was to recover a lost sect secret technique. It turned out that a Qi refinement disciple of the sword sect had been killed, and the secret technique on him was stolen. My mission was to avenge him and retrieve the lost technique. The supervisor whispered to me that this quest was very difficult and asked if I wanted to choose another one. She warned me that the culprit could be at the late stage of the Qi refinement realm, much stronger than me. She also mentioned that if I didn't complete the quest, I wouldn't be able to take on new ones. I smiled at her but decided to proceed with this task. Other players who witnessed this started mocking me, not only because the enemy was strong but also because the quest had very few clues. Ignoring their comments, I accepted the task and headed towards the gate. By evening, I arrived at the mission location, Chufeng City. In front of me was an inn, the key location for the quest. When the people saw me flying in the air, they immediately recognized me as someone from a major sect. And shortly after, a bunch of women came out to welcome me. As I stepped into the tavern, I was surprised to find it packed with people. Musicians were playing flutes and all kinds of instruments while guests held their cups and poured wine. Right in the center, a man was entertaining the crowd with the latest news and occasionally some amusing stories. He mentioned some interesting news. The head of the Xuanwu Taoist temple had made another breakthrough, and 2 other sects were forming an alliance through marriage. I wasn't surprised by how much he knew because I knew this man was the information broker of the 8 wildernesses. No news escaped his eyes, and he was here daily to earn some tips. I ordered a cup of hot tea and listened patiently, knowing I could find clues for my quest this way. After a while, the man on stage tapped his desk and started talking about a disciple from the Tianyan sword sect named Zhang Hai, who had been killed during his training journey. The killer was Zhou Hao, a rogue cultivator from the late stage of Qi refinement, known for his ruthless nature and association with the demonic path. The man finished his performance for the day and left the tavern. I followed him outside and called out to him, intending to buy some information from him. Unlike many newbie players who wander aimlessly, I knew that paying for information was the quickest way to get specific clues. The man turned around with a grin and assured me that as long as the price was right, he'd tell me everything he knew. Without hesitation, I tossed him a bag of spirit stones and asked where Zhou Hao was. He revealed that Zhou Hao, known for his lecherous tendencies, often frequented the red light district in Chufeng City. I nodded and was about to leave when he held up 5 fingers, saying he had another piece of crucial information that would only cost me 5 spirit stones. Again, I didn't hesitate and handed over a bag of spirit stones. Seeing that I was good-looking, he warned me that while Zhou Hao was just a rogue cultivator in the late stage of Qi refinement. However, his brother, Zhou Shen, was a foundation establishment cultivator. He advised me to be extremely careful. I thanked him and left. My next stop was Autumn Moon Pavilion, the most notorious red light district in the city. Inside, people were wrapped around each other, laughing and chatting. I even heard someone say, "Finish this drink, and then we can go to the room." Just then, a man staggered out, and the girls bid him farewell. "Master Zhou, come again next time." He turned around, cheeks flushed and clearly very drunk, laughing and promising he'd be back to visit each of them in turn. I hid behind a pillar, waiting for him. Once he was alone, I started following him quietly. We walked out of Chufeng City and into the forest on the outskirts. By now it was late at night. He was stumbling along, but soon he heard my footsteps and turned around warily, shouting, "Who's there?" I stepped out and said, "Someone who wants your life." Sobered up a bit, he summoned a weapon. Seeing I was just in the early stage of chi refinement, he didn't take me seriously until he noticed my outfit and realized I was from the Tianyan sword sect, probably here for revenge. He attacked first, charging straight at me. I dodged his attack swiftly, which surprised him, but he quickly used the momentum to swing his weapon at me again with great force, spinning 360 degrees. I drew my sword and struck back. The sound of metal clashing echoed and he was pushed back, clearly shocked by my strength. I simply told him, "It's not that I'm too strong, it's that you're too weak." What he didn't know was that my overpowered innate talent allowed me to have full base stats, and I had just learned the Tianyan Heart Sutra, making both my stats and ability far superior to those at my level. This time, he channeled his energy into his weapon, causing it to crackle with lightning before slashing at me with his frenzied blade technique. A powerful attack surged towards me, but I remained calm. It was the perfect opportunity to test the jade pendant my senior sister had given me. Just as the blade was about to strike me, a shield appeared, blocking the attack. This spirit shield skill is indeed super useful, I thought. His strike had consumed a lot of his energy, leaving him panting heavily. Despite all that, he still demanded I hand over my belongings, promising to spare my life if I did so. I laughed. Is he serious? Who gave him the courage to demand that? What a frickin' idiot. This enraged him, and he attacked again. His speed increased and he swung at me repeatedly, but I dodged every single time. His sword hung in the air and his eyes were wide with disbelief. "How is this possible?" he muttered. Realizing that continuing this fight would mean his death, he tried to retreat. I knew this was my chance. As he backed away, I lunged forward and slashed at his shoulder, dealing him significant damage. Blood flowed from the wound as he looked at me in shock. I was able to see his information. He had a total of 2,550 health, and his attributes weren't impressive. His skills were also displayed. Seeing his stats, I could only think, dude's got the strength of a soggy wet noodle. I increased the frequency of my attacks. Within moments, I had reduced his health by 70%. Even though he was at the late stage of chi refinement, his attributes were far inferior to mine. This time, I landed a critical hit, bringing him down to the ground. Pointing my sword at him, I told him to hand over our secret technique. He was terrified and began begging for mercy. Suddenly, I sensed danger and immediately dodged. A much stronger attack sliced through the space between us, shattering the ground. A figure emerged from the forest. "Brother, save me!" Zhou Hao shouted. I frowned as I looked at the man, and Zhou Hao started laughing, saying I was out of luck to see his brother around. Ignoring him, I focused on the newcomer's aura, instantly recognizing it as someone in the Foundation establishment stage. This must be Zhou Hao's brother, Zhou Shen. He walked over to his brother and scolded him. "I told you to stay in the mountains and lay low with things being so tense lately, but you wouldn't listen. If I hadn't noticed you were gone and come looking for you, you'd be dead today." Zhou Hao started apologizing, urging his brother to deal with me first. Zhou Shen looked at me with disdain and told me that if I handed over all my belongings, he would make my death quick and painless. I didn't bother to respond. They were nothing but clowns to me. Zhou Hao was about to take a container of pills to recover and planned to help his brother fight me afterward. In the next moment, little did they expect, I dashed forward and thrust my sword into his neck. A number appeared. Critical hit, -300. As I pulled the sword out, he let out a painful scream and collapsed onto the ground, the pills spilling from his hand. Zhou Shen looked at me furiously. I calmly said, "It seems your brother didn't understand the lesson that villains often die because they talk too much. Either way, my goal was to kill both of them sooner or later, and now it's his turn." However, I hadn't expected my opponent to be this strong. In the next second, his blade slashed across my body. I had no time to dodge and took the full brunt of the attack, suffering 220 damage. This was not good. He wasn't going to be easy to deal with. The blow sent me flying several meters, but I managed to catch a glimpse of his attributes. The dude had 5,300 health, and his overall stats were 3 times that of Zhou Hao. Before I could react, he suddenly vanished and reappeared behind me. I quickly turned and blocked his attack with my sword. The force of his strike pushed me back several meters again, but luckily, it didn't cause any damage this time. I steadied myself, realizing that although he was faster, my experience and muscle memory allowed me to anticipate his moves and defend accordingly. Nonetheless, that was a close call. Zhou Shen seemed surprised, probably embarrassed that a foundation establishment cultivator like him couldn't easily defeat a mere chi refinement newbie. His speed increased, and this time, he used a skill, the soul-splitting slash, dealing 300 damage to me. I regretted using the spirit shield earlier, as it now had a 15-minute cooldown. However, my newly obtained movement technique dropped from the newbie village boss earlier, the Phantom Step, which only had a 10-second cooldown, allowing me to create some distance and buy time. He smirked and quickly activated his own movement skill, Shadow Clone Step. Suddenly, 3 Zhou Shen appeared, attacking me from different directions. Seeing the 3 clones, I remained calm. Dealing with this kind of technique was simple if you could identify the real one. For example, only the middle one had a gleam in his eyes, while the other 2 looked lifeless. Focusing on this detail, I lunged forward, striking his chest. It was a critical hit, causing 55 damage and triggering an armor break effect that would last for 5 seconds, halving his defense. Now was the time to follow up. Seizing the opportunity, I thrust forward again, dealing 110 damage. He let out a furious roar, unleashing a burst of energy that pushed me back. Taking advantage of this moment, he used a second skill and charged at me again. His speed was overwhelming, and though each attack only dealt double-digit damage, I was starting to struggle. It was frustrating. Being only at the early stage of chi refinement, going up against a foundation establishment cultivator was still very rough. If I were at the mid-stage, I wouldn't be so disadvantaged. My health had already dropped by a third. I had no choice but to pull out the purple jade pill given to me by my mentor. Other players wouldn't face severe penalties upon death, especially during the newbie phase, but my innate talent would cause me to permanently decrease my stats by 10% if I died just once. I quickly swallowed the pill, and a purple aura enveloped my body. Zhou Shen hesitated, clearly taken aback. After consuming the pill, all of my combat attributes increased by 30 points for the next 5 minutes. He might have sensed some change in me, but he still didn't see me as a threat. He swung his blade at me again, and this time, I didn't even try to dodge. The pill had not only restored my health but also increased my defense. To his surprise, his attack was blocked without me even seeming to try. He quickly realized that the pill I consumed was extraordinary, and his eyes gleamed with greed, assuming I had more valuable items on me. He also knew that the pill's effects were temporary, and he was right. The pill's effects were limited. Before he could fully grasp the situation, I slashed at him, dealing 180 damage. I smiled and told him, "So I just need to kill you before the pill's effects wear off, right?" He never expected a single pill to make me this strong. Realizing he couldn't win in a direct fight, he started retreating, trying to buy time until my pill's effects wore off. However, his speed was no match for mine now. He kept taking hits, and the system notified me that I had comprehended the essence of swordsmanship, increasing my sword skill aptitude by 5%. This was fantastic. It felt like I was slowly grasping the true essence of swordsmanship. After several more attacks, his health rapidly dropped to less than 15%. I saw fear in his eyes, but what I didn't know was that he had decided I must be an important disciple of the sword sect, and letting me go would be a huge mistake. Suddenly, his weapon underwent a bizarre transformation, and a purple energy enveloped it. His aura changed dramatically, his eyes turning blood red as he launched a powerful strike at me. Sensing something was wrong even before he activated his skill, I anticipated his move ahead of time and used Phantom Step to dodge. To his surprise, I reappeared right in front of him. Seizing the moment as he struggled to recover from his swing, I performed a swift throat slash. My sword cut across his throat, dealing 466 damage and instantly depleting his remaining health. He lost all strength, muttering, "How can this be?" before collapsing heavily to the ground. I took a deep breath, relieved that it was finally over. The system notified me that I had completed the Hell difficulty quest and could return to the sect to claim my reward. With a moment to spare, I began checking the items dropped by the 2 brothers. But wait, before heading back, there was still something I needed to do. After collecting the dropped items, I headed back to the city and into the bustling market. I wanted to buy a gift for my mentor since this was my first quest outside the sect. Though my master was powerful and likely lacked nothing, the saying goes, "It's the thought that counts." A gift might also improve our relationship and increase the rapport. But what should I buy? I wandered past various shops until I arrived at a jade shop. Girls generally like jade and other jewelry, so I decided to buy an expensive jade hairpin for my mentor. With my purchase in hand, I returned to the sect and went to the task board, handing over the plaque to the supervisor. The girl was surprised to see me back so soon, having completed a hell difficulty quest. Other disciples and players looked at me in astonishment, since they believed that such a quest required at least a late-stage chi refinement cultivator. The girl was very enthusiastic, praising me as an elite of the inner hall with boundless potential and wishing me success in my martial path. She then handed me the reward and an additional 100 lower-grade spirit stones as a bonus. I stored the rewards in my storage bag while the other players looked on enviously. Suddenly, they crowded around me, asking about my current cultivation level and whether I was considering taking on disciples, while some invited me to join their guilds. The craziest part was even female players offering to do anything for me if I agreed to carry them. I cupped my fist and said, "Thank you for all of your kindness, but I have other matters to attend to." With that, I dashed out of the crowd, but they continued to chase after me. Maybe this is the downside of being too exceptional. Suddenly, 2 disciple NPCs appeared and blocked the players, telling them not to bother the disciple of the sect leader. Only then did they realize my true identity. I headed to the inner area and straight to the main hall, where I found my mentor lounging on a large chair, reading something. "Mentor, your disciple has returned," I said. She put down her book, and hearing that I had completed the hell difficulty quest, she nodded. Her voice was melodious, but she didn't praise me. Instead, her tone became stern. She reminded me that she had only allowed me to choose the hard difficulty, not the hell difficulty. She pointed out that failure in the quest would have meant death, and the worst part is the loss of a sword sect prodigy, which would have been a significant loss for the sect. I knew she was concerned for my well-being. Raising my head, I obediently admitted my mistake. "Disciple understands. Your criticism is well-deserved, mentor." Satisfied with my attitude, she sat up and asked about the cultivation level of the opponents I encountered. I truthfully reported that while I initially thought my opponent was only at the late stage of chi refinement, I was surprised to find that he had a brother who was at the foundation establishment stage. She was somewhat surprised, and I explained that I had mainly relied on the pill she gave me to come on top. After listening, she nodded, but still cautioned me against acting recklessly in the future, reminding me that I was her most talented disciple. She then handed me a talisman, instructing me not to use it unless I faced a life-threatening situation. What I didn't know was that while she appeared calm on the outside, inside she was thinking, "I never imagined his combat talent would be so extraordinary, truly a once-in-a-millennium prodigy." I didn't expect such a benefit, so I quickly took the talisman in my hand. The talisman contained a wisp of my mentor's original spirit, usable only once, and I can't use it against real players. I thanked her, feeling elated. With the entire sect behind me, I felt confident in whatever I planned to do. She then handed me 2 differently colored chi-gathering pills, one as promised, and another as a bonus for completing the hell difficulty quest. I bowed deeply, expressing my gratitude. She instructed me to go to the library to find the sword techniques I needed. Just as she was about to leave, I called out to her. "Is there anything else?" she asked, looking a bit puzzled. I took out the jade hairpin I had bought earlier. I told her that this was my first quest outside the sect, and I wanted to bring a gift for her. I couldn't afford anything too valuable, so I bought this jade hairpin. With a pause, I said with a smile, "I thought it looked nice and wanted to give it to you. I hope you like it." She took the hairpin and examined it, momentarily lost in thought. Seconds later, she disappeared, however, her voice echoing, "Cultivate diligently and do not slack off." Listening to her tone, I wondered if she didn't like the gift. But soon, the system notified me that her rapport had increased by 5 points, bringing the total to 10. Aha! The gift was successful, and she did like the gift. As I left the hall, I felt great. My mentor might appear cold, but perhaps she was just shy. Suddenly, a loud explosion echoed. I looked up. What happened? In the distance, an old man was coughing incessantly. How could I fail again? This youth-retaining pill is harder to refine than the Tianyuan pill. I won't give up, he muttered. This man was Elder Tian King, one of the 12 great elders. He glanced at the crowd and announced that he was refining a pill and needed an herb. He asked if anyone could find it for him. A quest panel appeared before the players, showing a hell-difficult task to find a yin-continuing grass before dawn. The details of how and where to obtain the herb were all listed, but none of the players stepped forward. The quest location is so far away, and on top of that it's a hell-difficulty quest. It required going to the distant Kanglin Medicine Valley. The teleportation would definitely need some spirit stones. Many considered this task too difficult and expensive, not worth the effort. As newbies, they didn't want to take such a risk. I stepped out from the crowd and bowed to the elder. "Greetings, Elder Tian King. I am willing to seek the yin continuing grass for you." The crowd looked at me in astonishment. I didn't mind. Elder Tian King stroked his beard, seemingly recognizing me as the newly accepted disciple of the sect leader. Why did I take on this task? Well, it's simple. The old man before me was the sword sect's most skilled alchemy grandmaster. Building a good relationship with someone like him would surely be beneficial. After accepting the task, I immediately took my leave and headed toward the Kanglin Medicine Valley. I arrived after sunset, and I only had less than 24 hours left. However, the valley was filled with flowers and trees, with the night breeze carrying the rich, fragrant scent of medicinal herbs. I couldn't help but marvel at how realistic every landscape in 8 Wasteland really was. Even though it was dark, the game offered items like lanterns to help with visibility. Based on my previous experience, the herb is dropped from the field boss Medicine Spirit Falcon, and it usually lurks in the deepest parts of the valley. I walked for a few more minutes and figured I must be getting close. Sure enough, I soon heard some commotion. Not far ahead, a group of players was already battling the falcon. It's nice that I finally found it, but it looked like someone else had beaten me to it. Judging by their formation, they all seemed to be from the same guild. The monster's health was already down to about half, but they didn't seem to be having an easy time. Several of them were being knocked around like rag dolls. A dozen noobs, and they still couldn't handle the boss? Wow, they're really struggling. It looked like they were on the verge of a wipe. I thought for a moment, and decided it might be better to negotiate with them and see if they'd let me share some of the loot. As I got closer, I couldn't make out who they were from a distance, but they clearly saw me. One of the girls, looking surprised, whispered to another, "Sister Ling, it's that handsome big shot again." It wasn't until I was close that I realized I actually knew some of them. That should make things easier. Politely, I asked if they'd be willing to share the boss, explaining that I had a task to complete. However, a white-haired woman approached and asked, "Ling, do you know this guy?" Holding a staff, she looked like a mage. Ling explained that I was the big shot she had mentioned before, the one who had soloed the Wild Boar King in the beginner's village and triggered a server-wide announcement. She seemed pretty respectful toward this woman. I didn't catch their whole conversation, but I saw the woman nodding, probably assuming that I was here to capture the boss and get the Tianyan Heart Sutra. However, this boss was just as important to their guild. Even though they see me as a friend, they couldn't just hand it over. Ling nodded and walked over to explain. She looked a bit embarrassed as she told me that their guild leader also needed the boss for a quest and asked if I could wait until the respawn tomorrow. Honestly, I wasn't too surprised. It was pretty much what I expected. They weren't going to give it up so easily. But judging by how things were going for them, I might not need to wait for tomorrow's respawn after all. Right as I thought of this, the falcon let out a piercing screech, flapping its wings violently and sending players flying in all directions. At the same time, a cloud of pale yellow smoke floated toward the group. Anyone who inhaled it instantly fell into a dizzy state, stumbling around like they couldn't even stay upright. In the next second, the boss launched its attack. Its sharp talons effortlessly tore through several players, dealing a flat 999 damage with each strike, instantly zeroing out their HP. I casually informed them that when the boss's health drops below 50%, it releases stun-inducing pollen that not only reduces defense, but also extends their skill cooldowns. I wished them luck. Before the white-haired girl could reply, she grabbed her staff and charged back into the fray. She used Earthbound, a control-type skill, and immediately followed it up with Blazing Lantern, a powerful DPS spell. The air around the falcon suddenly became scorching hot, and a massive fireball engulfed the creature, making it screech in pain. I shook my head, thinking, if you can't kill it quickly, attacks like that will only make the boss angrier. Just as I suspected, the falcon broke free of the binding in no time and charged straight at the white-haired girl. Ling shouted, "Watch out!" But it was too late. The boss's sharp beak already struck her. Her health bar dropped by a lot, but fortunately she had good gear and wasn't instantly killed. She didn't panic either. She quickly retreated to create some distance, casting another spell mid-air. The next moment, several large rocks crashed down, which only made the falcon even angrier. I couldn't help but wince. "Lady Mage, that's not what you are supposed to do," I yelled out to her. Everyone froze and looked at me. I told them I could teach them how to handle this boss, but the yin continued grass it drops had to go to me. They eagerly agreed. I explained that right now, the Falcon's aggro was entirely focused on the white-haired girl, so using more DPS skills would only enrage it further. Just look at her health bar. It's down to less than 10%. Once the boss recovers, it could finish her off with a single swipe. As the strongest mage in my previous life, I decided to give her a hands-on lesson. I grabbed her arm and told her that Falling Rock should be combined with Earthbound to maximize damage output. I figured that her Earthbound cooldown should be up by now. Use it first, then let the others hit the boss with their damage skills. Work with your team, don't just brute force it on your own. Then she started following my advice. Soon enough, the boss was controlled again, and the remaining teammates charged toward it. Even Ling joined the fight. A good mage should always coordinate with their team, controlling from a distance and letting the others do the heavy hitting. The white-haired girl's eyes were practically sparkling at me like she had just figured out a huge secret. Maybe she had been relying too much on her good gear and spamming skills without much thought. But now she understood. "Oh, so that's how it works. Thanks for the guidance," she said, looking quite grateful. However, just as everything was going smoothly, some uninvited guests arrived. "This area is under Bloodbane Guild control now. Back off from the boss, or don't blame us for getting rough." It was another group from a rival guild, swooping in to steal the boss. The girls were smart, though. They didn't keep attacking the boss, and instead had a few of their players focus on holding off the boss while they check on the newcomers. They didn't have enough people left to risk a full fight, especially when the other guild could easily take advantage of the chaos. The Bloodbane Guild was notorious, but even if they couldn't win the fight, the girl didn't want to back down. I had been standing on the sidelines this whole time, watching quietly. I could tell they were pretty disappointed that they couldn't finish off the boss, but they knew if a guild war broke out, they'd have to give it up. That's when I knew it was time for me to step in. I made them an offer. "I'll take down the boss for you. I'll solo the rest of the boss. Once it's done, aside from the yin continue grass, I'll pick one piece of equipment from the loot." They were shocked, but after a moment of consideration, they all agreed. The white-haired girl even wanted to leave a few people with me to help out. I just shook my head. "No need. You guys focus on the guild fight. Leave the boss to me." With that, I charged straight at the boss. Behind me, I heard some loud laughter. The Bloodbane Guild leader clearly didn't think I could handle a late-stage chi refining boss by myself. With that, they charged at the girls. It was obvious that the Moonshadow Guild, which is the name of their guild, wasn't in great shape after just fighting the boss, and now, with fewer players, they were at a serious disadvantage. Before long, their numbers started to drop. Soon, only a handful of them were left, standing back to back, watching as they were completely surrounded. "This is what happens when you mess with Bloodbane," their leader sneered. "Consider this a little lesson for your trash guild," he said while probably thinking to himself that wiping out a guild and snagging a first kill on the boss, this is turning out to be perfect. But the next second, one of his guild members pointed up at the sky. "Boss, I think that's a first kill announcement." He froze, looked up, and saw it too. At that moment, everyone got the notification. "Congratulations to the player for achieving the first kill of the Medicine Spirit Falcon in 8 Wastelands. Rewards, 400 reputation points, 2 points of innate charisma, and an achievement badge." Wait, the boss is dead already? The Bloodbane players looked around in disbelief. That's when I stepped off the boss's corpse and called out to Ling, "I've taken down the boss. Hurry up and check out the loot." The opposing guild leader suddenly stood up, clearly furious. He pointed at me and shouted that I had stolen his boss, claiming that if I could solo a boss this early, I'd be a major threat down the line. He even wanted to kill me and take my gear. Like I was going to just let that slide? No way. One of his lackeys charged at me, and it turned out this guy was a UFC fighter in real life. But here? He was just a low-level key-refining noob. He threw a full-power punch at me, but I dodged it effortlessly. Before he could even process what happened, I slashed at him with my sword. What looked like a casual strike ended up being a critical hit, wiping out half of his health bar in an instant. In my past life as a mage, I spent 9 years in the game dealing with countless ambushes. His weak punch was nothing to me. He stared at me in disbelief, probably thinking, "There's no way he reacted that fast." But before he could recover, I slashed again, this time across his neck. Throat cut, fatal damage. His health bar emptied, and his body vanished, leaving behind nothing but a tombstone. Seeing their buddy turn into a tombstone, the rest of the players finally snapped out of their shock. They couldn't understand how my damage was so high. They even thought I was hacking, but that's impossible in this game. I calmly looted my spoils and then turned to face them. Just because I don't go looking for trouble doesn't mean I'm afraid of it, I thought. I didn't care about the beef between the two guilds, but if they messed with me, they'd better be prepared. 4 more players charged at me, thinking they could win with sheer numbers. Ah, so stubborn. I stood there, letting them hit me, but their damage couldn't even outpace my health regen. Not wanting to waste any more time, I quickly dispatched them, and in just a few breaths, they all went down. Blood dripped from my sword onto the ground, where a few more tombstones appeared. No one else dared to approach. The guild leader shot me a stunned look, then shouted, "Brothers, retreat for now. We'll get our revenge sooner or later." "Master Lin, thank you so much for your help," the white-haired girl said gratefully. I waved her off and told them it was no big deal. Then, we finally had time to check out the loot. A pile of items lay on the ground, though I wasn't all that surprised. The girls, however, were dumbfounded. 6 items had dropped from the boss. They had never seen a boss drop so much at once. As we previously agreed, the yin continue grass is mine, and I'll take 1 more item as payment. No problem, right? To my surprise, the white-haired girl shook her head, telling me that it was me who dealt the final blow to the boss, and that I was the one who taught them how to fight it. Without me, the boss would have been stolen, and they wouldn't have gotten anything at all. Thus, she thinks that the loot rightfully belongs to me. But since it was them who started fighting the boss first, and I've already claimed the first kill reward, it's better to stick to the original deal. Seeing how firm I was, they finally nodded in agreement. As I started picking out my loot, I noticed the 2 girls whispering to each other. I noticed Ling fiddling with something, and a few seconds later, I got a system notification. 5 million had been transferred to my real-life bank account. That must have been from them. 5 million, just like that, without even blinking. Looks like this girl's got some serious cash. Just then, the white-haired girl walked over and extended her hand to introduce herself. Her name is Zhang Luoyu, the leader of the Moon Shadow Guild. We shook hands, and something clicked in my mind. Wait a second. Zhang Luoyu? Why does that name sound so familiar? Then it hit me. She was ranked right below me in my previous life, the 2nd strongest mage after me. But that was just her in-game achievements. In the real world, before the disaster struck, she was the daughter of the richest man in Shanghai City, practically swimming in wealth. Knowing her background now, I couldn't help but hold her hand a couple of seconds longer, hoping to soak up some of that rich person aura. Ling coughed twice. "Master Lin, I think that's enough," she teased, assuming I was taking advantage of the situation. I let out a nervous chuckle. "Sorry, I was just deep in thought. Totally unintentional." Zhang Luoyu's face flushed a little, though I didn't realize that at the time. Meanwhile, Wanling wasn't buying my excuse for a second. She thought my lack of interest in her was just because I was focused on leveling up. Little did she know, in the back of her mind, she was starting to suspect it was because she wasn't pretty enough. Not that she'd ever admit it out loud. With the task complete, I didn't stick around much longer. I said my goodbyes and left. After I left, Zhang Luoyu, still blushing, shyly said, "Your friend is actually pretty nice." Ling immediately piped up, "Nice? He was totally taking advantage of you just now." But then something seemed to click in her mind. Wait a minute. Why was Zhang Luoyu blushing so much? Could it be that she's into Master Lin? As they left, they made plans to give each of their guild members who participated in the battle $50,000 as a rewards. Once everyone was gone, a girl stepped out from the shadows. She let out a sigh of relief. Her name was Ziazi, the most popular streamer in the entire national server. She turned on her stream, watching as donations and comments flooded in non-stop. Excited, she said, "Hey family, today's stream did not disappoint, huh? Not only did I bring you a front row seat to a guild war, but you also got to witness a super expert in action. Come on, smash that follow button." She then started gushing about my gameplay, her face full of admiration, saying how I took on a crowd and soloed a late-stage chi refining boss like it was nothing. And of course, she had to comment on how handsome I was. In her mind, I was now the #1 expert in 8 Wasteland, and she decided right then and there that I was her new idol. Meanwhile, the comments were flying, with some viewers clearly feeling a little jealous. One after another, they grumbled about how I must be hacking. There was no way someone could be that strong otherwise. Elsewhere, another person was watching the stream, seething with rage. It was the Bloodbane guild leader. "Damn it! They're all dead, and he stole my guild's fame too." His teeth clenched as he kept repeating my name under his breath. Suddenly, he stood up, smashing the vase next to him in fury. I swear if I see you again, you're dead meat, he roared, promising revenge. Of course, I had no clue about any of this because by then I was already back at my sect. Holding the yin continues grass as I arrived at Elder Tian Qing's residence. He was busy adding herbs to his alchemy furnace when he saw me and motioned for me to place the items on the table. Then, without even looking up, he tossed a small box my way, telling me that's my reward. I opened the box, and inside were 3 spirit-grade attribute pills. Each one could permanently increase a random combat attribute by 1 to 5 points. Both the attribute and the points were completely random. There was also a bracelet that boosted speed by 5 points, increased dodge chance by 8%, and reduced cooldowns for movement skills by 10%. Definitely some good stuff. After storing everything in my bag, I thought for a moment and decided to ask the elder if he had the recipe for the youth preservation pill. In my mind, I was recalling a time from my past life. It was mentioned that Elder Tian Qing had finally succeeded in crafting the youth preservation pill after 99 attempts. I thought to myself, if I give him the recipe now, maybe I'll earn some extra rapport. The elder sighed, clearly frustrated, saying how he tried more than a dozen times and failed each time. Without a proper recipe, he's just feeling his way in the dark. He then looked at me curiously, surprised that I even knew about the youth preservation pill in the first place. I replied nonchalantly, "Oh, I think I read about it in some ancient text." Then, I recited the recipe to him. His eyes widened in shock. Can't believe that I had such a fortuitous encounter. He immediately urged me to stay put. Stick around, and if I mess up the proportions, correct me. All right, the plan's going smoothly, I thought to myself. After a while, the lid of the furnace suddenly popped open, startling both of us. 2 pills flew out and the elder burst into laughter, saying he's finally done it. He had finally succeeded in making the youth preservation pill after all this time. To my surprise, he decided to reward me by giving me one of the pills. System notification. Elder Tian Qing's rapport with you has increased by 20 points. I picked up the pill and checked its stats. It permanently increased innate charisma by 5 points and boosted rapport growth from female NPCs by 5%. On top of that, if I gifted it to a female NPC, it could randomly raise her rapport for me by 10 to 20 points. Wow, I didn't expect Elder to be so generous. This pill was incredibly rare, and even knowing the recipe, crafting it would be nearly impossible without the skills of a grandmaster like him. I definitely scored big. The pill itself wasn't useful to me, but I knew exactly who I could give it to. I bowed respectfully to the elder. "Thank you, Elder. I'll take my leave now." But before I could go, Elder stopped me. I wondered if he had something else for me. He asked if I had any interest in alchemy and then dropped a bombshell. He wanted to take me as his disciple and teach me the art of pill refining. A system notification popped up. Special opportunity triggered. Elder Tian Qing wishes to take you as his disciple. Do you accept? I was torn. Then what about my current mentor? How could I handle this? Just as I was struggling with the decision, a cold yet familiar voice came from behind me. Elder Tian Qing, do you really have the heart to steal my only disciple? The moment the words were spoken, a graceful figure appeared. It was none other than my mentor. I couldn't help but feel a bit nervous, thinking to myself, why is she here? And at a time like this? I'm not planning on joining Elder Tian Qing anyway, so let's not get any misunderstandings. Elder scratched the back of his head awkwardly. Sect leader, you've misunderstood. I never intended to steal your disciple. It's just that he shows a lot of talent in alchemy, and I couldn't help but want to teach him the craft. She then smiled faintly, saying it seemed she had been mistaken. Hearing this, I let out a sigh of relief. Phew, she wasn't mad after all. But then, in the next second, she added that she believes my talent for cultivation is even greater, and the sword sect needs powerful immortals, not alchemists. However, she is okay with me learning from elders after I reach a certain level. She gave me a quick glance, and I suddenly had this sinking feeling. Was she actually upset? No way, right? If she were mad, why would she be talking about me becoming Elder Tian Qing's apprentice later? Elder, completely oblivious, nodded cheerfully, saying she's right. Once his cultivation improves, he will happily take me as his disciple. With that, he turned back to his furnace. Come with me to the Sword Palace, she said lightly, though something about her voice gave me a bad feeling. I agreed, but internally I was starting to sweat a little. Why do I feel like something's off here? Back at the Sword Palace, her voice was calm, but I couldn't help but notice a hint of jealousy. It seems you're not very satisfied with me as your mentor. If that's the case, perhaps we should dissolve our master-disciple relationship, and you can go find yourself a better teacher. Oh, crap. She's definitely mad. I thought about explaining myself, but it felt like too little, too late. Maybe my best bet was to just own up to it. But of course, being the formidable sect leader she wasn't going to let me off that easy. Hearing my owning up to it, she then asked, what exactly did I think I did wrong? She hadn't outright said she was angry, but come on, we all know what that means. Ah yes, the classic I'm not mad move. Women really do have that down to an art form. But of course, I only thought that in my head. I quickly said I was absolutely wrong, taking the safest route, explaining that I was wrong to let my mind wander and not focus solely on cultivation as she instructed. I wasted precious time thinking about learning alchemy instead of dedicating myself to my training and the expectations she set for me. I glanced up, and sure enough, her expression softened a bit. Time to go all in. With a bow, I added that she's the best in the world, not only unrivaled in strength but also peerlessly beautiful, like an immortal goddess. There's no way I'd want to be anyone else's disciple. It must have been my heartfelt apology that finally made her little bit of resentment vanish into thin air. She even smiled, and suddenly I got a system notification. Mentor's rapport +5. Woohoo, seems like I'm off the hook. Since you've recognized your mistake, I won't hold it against you, she said, sounding more forgiving. Seizing the moment, I took out the youth preservation pill. To show my sincere apology, this is a small gift from me to Mentor, I said with a bow. She blinked in disbelief, surprised to see the legendary youth preservation pill. She clearly knew how rare it was and asked where I had gotten it. When I told her I helped Elder Tianqing make it, she insisted I keep it for myself. But I couldn't help thinking to myself, come on now, you've looked at it like 5 times already. But with a mentor, this tsundere, I knew I had to take matters into my own hands. Ignoring her refusal, I insisted that I specifically ask Elder Tianqing for it so I could give it to her. In fact, I've been learning alchemy just so I can make more of these for her. Soon, I'll be making one every day, enough to replace all her meals. She couldn't help but burst into laughter. I froze for a moment. Uh-oh. When she smiles like that, I'm defenseless. I threw in a few more compliments for good measure, and sure enough, she accepted the pill happily. Then, a system notification popped up. Mentor's rapport +20. Current rapport, 35. But being the generous girl she is, she decided she couldn't just take my gift without giving something in return. She decided to give me a secret martial technique, perfect for my chi refining stage. As expected, the higher the rapport, the better the rewards. As I left the sword palace behind her, I noticed something surprising. She was actually wearing the hairpin I'd given her. I couldn't help but smile a bit. After receiving the martial technique, I returned to my room to start training. It didn't take long before I successfully mastered the Phoenix Feather, a profound grade technique. Not only did it deal AoE damage, but it could also interrupt others' skills and had a crippling effect. This thing was worth its weight in gold. Just as I was basking in my newfound skill, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, to my surprise, it was Senior Sister. I asked her why she was visiting so late. Turns out every disciple of the sword sect has to complete 3 tasks during each major stage of their cultivation. Senior Sister had broken through to the crystallization stage, but hadn't yet completed her tasks. She explained that she was feeling like she was on the verge of another breakthrough, and if she didn't finish her task soon, the sect would punish her. But why hadn't she done them yet, I wondered. Her face turned bright red as she sheepishly admitted, the romance novels were just too good, and she kind of forgot. Before I could respond, she grabbed my hand and said she was missing just one more task, a demon-slaying mission that required 2 people. She asked if I'd help her. I found it a little odd since there were other disciples in the sect stronger than me. Why didn't she ask them? But honestly, I didn't think too much of it. After all, Senior Sister had already given me a spirit-grade jade pendant as soon as we met. It wouldn't be right to turn her down after that. Junior brother, you're so kind, she said with a smile. System notification. Nanggong Yue's rapport increased by 10. Current rapport 25. Another notification popped up right after. Opportunity triggered. Help Nanggong Yue complete her task by traveling to Wangyu Village to slay demons together. The following night, we finally arrived at Wangyu Village. The place was eerily quiet, with an unsettling chill in the air. A foul stench lingered, making it clear that this village had been overrun by malevolent forces. All the villagers had likely become sustenance for these evil spirits. Senior sister suspected this was the work of a demonic cultivator, and our task was to clear out these spirits and uncover the truth. I glanced around and realized I'd been here before. In the future, this place would become the entrance to a crystallization stage blood infant dungeon, a spot I farmed countless times in my previous life. We continued forward until we reached a desolate courtyard. The place was barren and run down, with nothing but an old tree and a well with chains wrapped around it. As we got closer, the chains suddenly began to rattle and move. In the next moment, countless evil spirits shot out from the well. Senior sister immediately drew her weapon and stepped in front of me, charging toward the evil spirit. But it quickly became apparent that the well was hiding more than just one spirit. Dark energy surged as countless spirits began breaking free from their seal. I hadn't expected there to be so many. One chi refining stage evil spirit wasn't much to worry about, but hundreds? That was a different story. Senior sister realized this too. It seemed the villagers had all been turned into spirits, which made her furious. How could someone commit such an atrocity? She muttered through gritted teeth. She was determined to revenge on the village and uphold justice. I prepared to back her up, knowing this was going to be a long night. We unleashed our skills on the swarm of spirits. Senior sister, fueled by her overwhelming sense of justice, vowed to use this demonic cultivator's life as a tribute to the poor villagers who had died such tragic deaths. After breaking through the horde of evil spirits, she charged toward a nearby wooden house. I was a little surprised. She was proving to be much more reliable than she looked. But just as she stormed into the house, a massive hand shot out from within. "Watch out!" I shouted. Her reflexes were quick, and she raised her sword to block the attack, though the hand left a dark mark on her blade. I kept my eyes fixed on the direction of the house. Suddenly, the entire building exploded, and a man's voice echoed through the debris. "To think that my cultivation would attract disciples of the Tianyan sword sect," he sneered. "Well, I can't let you leave now." A powerful aura erupted from him. I was surprised to see that he is a golden core stage cultivator, but that shouldn't be right. Could the sect's intelligence have been wrong? I shook my head, focusing on his energy. He must have just broken through recently since his aura was unstable. The man seemed surprised as well, eyeing me with a mix of amusement and curiosity. "Your cultivation isn't high, but your insight is sharp," while admitting he just reached the golden core stage. Even plans to turn the two of us into evil spirits, so his power will grow even further. With a wave of his sleeve, a thick black fog erupted from a banner, shooting into the sky. She tells me to step back. Then her sword energy soared into the sky, turning the evil spirits around her into ash. As she closed in on him, she leaped into the air, her sword glowing with an intense light, and unleashed a powerful strike directly at him. The two clashed in mid-air, their battle raging above me. Given my current level, just a mid-chi refining cultivator, I knew I had no business being involved in a fight of this caliber. One stray attack could send me straight back to the newbie village. Better to keep my distance for now and avoid becoming collateral damage. The man, realizing things were getting serious, reached for a gourd at his waist and tossed it down toward me. I knew exactly what he was planning. A thick crimson mist erupted from the gourd, and out of it emerged a terrifying, gigantic, baby-headed monster. I quickly checked its stats. An elite-level monster with mid-foundation establishment strength, but instead of attacking me, the creature flicked its tongue at senior sister in mid-air. Like I was going to let that happen. I swung my sword, landing a critical hit that dealt 1,610 damage, slicing its tongue clean off. I tell her to focus on that demonic cultivator, and I'll handle this thing. The monster let out a furious scream, saying how he will eat my heart, my liver. However, I didn't let him finish. Using Phantom Step, I dealt another 1,260 damage, cutting him down before he could get too close. Suddenly, the fight shifted into its second phase. The monster's body split open, releasing a swarm of bats. They used Bloodbat Screech, a move that could shake a player's focus and reduce the effectiveness of movement skills by 30%. I closed my eyes, steadying my mind, refusing to let the bats throw me off. With my sword firmly in hand, I unleashed Phoenix Feather. The powerful AoE skill wiped out the entire swarm of bats in an instant. I then followed up with a final strike on the monster, triggering the crippling effect, ignoring its armor for 15 seconds. Not that it mattered, though. By then, the creature was already done for. Meanwhile, senior sister had taken down the demonic cultivator. "Curse you! This can't be!" The man's voice trembled with fury and defeat. As I watched senior sister in midair, I realized I had misjudged her. She might look soft and sweet, but her strength was not to be underestimated. I had definitely been wrong about her earlier. Just as the man was on the verge of death, he threw out a small box. Senior sister instinctively slashed at it with her sword, slicing the box in two. But from the halves, a thick pink mist burst out. I realized what was happening and shouted, "Cover your mouth and nose!" But it was too late. The smoke was already seeping through her clothes and skin, burrowing into her body. Her breathing became erratic, and her eyes grew hazy. I rushed over to check on her, but with the last bit of clarity she had left, she tells me to not look at her. I let out a bitter laugh. These were charm insects, a parasitic bug that releases smoke that triggers intense lust in its victim. Senior sister had probably never encountered something like this before, which is why she was caught completely off guard. Her condition was deteriorating rapidly. Then, out of nowhere, my system notifications went crazy. The rapport between us skyrocketed, and soon it reached 92. But I couldn't celebrate. This surge in rapport wasn't real. It was the insects messing with her mind. She kept getting closer, her breath hot against my skin. Most men would be tempted to take advantage of the situation, especially with her in this state. But I couldn't do that. Logic won over impulse, and I pushed her away. It was dangerous to do this. When she regained her senses, at best, her rapport would reset to 0. At worst, she'd hate me forever. But I couldn't become that kind of person. I glanced toward the well. I've never seen this side quest before, but I remember you can find some potions and pills underneath the well. But it was guarded by a magic array, and at my current level, there was no way I could break through unscathed. Still, I had no choice. "Hang in there, senior sister. I'll get you the antidote," I said, rushing toward the well. Inside, it was even more grim. Bones of the villagers lay everywhere, and the air was thick with evil spirits. Holding a torch, I rushed inside with damage numbers popping up over my head, 100 points of damage per second. At last, deep within the well, I saw a faint glow. There it was. The antidote had to be in that bottle. I hurried toward it, but as I approached, the magic array activated. In a split second, I summoned a spirit shield, the protective power of my jade pendant surrounding me. The first wave of attacks was blocked, but then I saw a second bolt of lightning beginning to gather. I grabbed the bottle and with a leap, launched myself toward the mouth of the well. But the lightning was fast. It struck me just before I could escape. System notification, hit by lightning, HP minus 4,000. The sheer force of the impact blasted me out of the well, sending me flying several meters. The system also notified me that yin energy had entered my body. HP is critically low. The unconscious state will begin to trigger. Thankfully, I still had a bit less than 100 health left, but I was teetering on the edge. Fighting the dizziness, I crawled over to senior sister and quickly poured the antidote into her mouth. Then everything went black as I collapsed. My last thought was, why is this so soft? Not long after, senior sister woke up. She blinked, feeling something heavy on her chest. That's when she realized I was lying on top of her. Her face instantly turned red, tears welling up in her eyes. The situation reminded her of all those romance novels she'd read. Could it really be happening for real? She screamed, then slapped me so hard I flew several feet back, and just like that, I lost another 75 health. A tiny damage number popped up, but there wasn't much of my HP bar left to begin with. "You beast! You pervert! I hate you!" she cried, half sobbing, half shouting. "System notification. Nan Gongyue's rapport has dropped to 0. I had no idea what was happening since I was completely knocked out on the ground. After crying for what seemed like an eternity, she finally began to calm down. She noticed that I was still lying motionless on the ground. Next to me, she spotted the medicine bottle. Slowly, she started piecing together what had happened before she lost control, how I had pushed her away and then rushed into the well. I might have misunderstood Junior Brother, she thought, glancing toward the well where traces of dark energy and lightning still lingered. Did he really enter the magic array just to save me? Gently, she turned me over. Her eyes widened when she saw the gaping wound on my back, still seared with the marks of the burns. It was true. He risked his life to save me, she thought. Tears welled up in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of guilt. She hurriedly lifted my unconscious body, determined to return to the sect and seek help from her grandfather. Traveling through the night, senior sister finally arrived back at the sword sect by dawn. Many players saw her as she landed on the sect grounds, immediately recognizing her as the famous fairy NPC. But why was she carrying an unconscious player on her back? Whispers spread through the crowd of players below, and even the NPC disciples of the sect began to murmur among themselves. Why is the little junior sister carrying a man? Some sharp-eyed individuals recognized me, and the gossip only intensified. One person, however, wasn't thrilled with the sight. A man in the distance clenched his fists, clearly unhappy. He was the sect's senior disciple, Chu Tianhan, and from the look on his face, jealousy was starting to brew. As senior sister carried me on her sword, she flew to a secluded hilltop. I wasn't sure how much time had passed, but eventually, I woke up to the sound of a voice. "You're awake?" I groggily looked around, still quite disoriented, not sure where I am. Even from a distance, I could feel the presence of a man whose aura rivaled that of Elder Tian King. Was he the one who saved me? Trembling slightly, I managed to sit up. "Thank you for saving me," I said, still weak. I introduced myself as a disciple of the Tianyan Sword Sect, and I asked for his name, saying I will never forget this debt of gratitude. The man introduced himself as Nanggong Yuan, also known as Tianyuan, none other than the senior sister's grandfather. Ah, I see. In this game, anyone with Tian in their name is a big deal. I quickly bowed respectfully to the elder, but he didn't seem all that pleased. In fact, he looked slightly irritated. He tells me to not bother remembering this as a favor, then his tone turns sharp, telling me to just remember one thing. Confused, I looked up at him, only to be met with a gaze full of murderous intent. "Stay away from my granddaughter," he warned, his voice low and dangerous. "If you so much as think about laying a hand on her, I won't let you off, even if you are the sect leader's disciple." Just then, senior sister walked over, clearly upset. "Grandpa, you promised you wouldn't say anything inappropriate," she scolded. The intimidating elder, who had been brimming with killing intent just moments before, quickly changed his tune. He laughed awkwardly, trying to placate her, saying how he was just joking around. Forcing a smile, he said I was a good kid and I saved her. She ignored him and sat beside me, asking about my injuries. But I could still feel the elder's eyes boring into me like he was deciding the best way to end me for good. Playing it safe, I replied, "Thanks to senior sister's concern, I'm much better now." She nodded and began explaining everything that had happened while I was unconscious. If we had returned even a bit later, the yin energy would have fully invaded my body, and then it would have been a serious problem. Hearing this, I said, "Thank you so much, senior sister. I owe you my life." She smiled and waved it off, believing there's no need to be so formal between us. I chuckled, saying that's true, but my smile quickly faded as I felt a chill down my spine. The elder's glare had intensified. I hurriedly scooted away from senior sister. Startled by my sudden movement, she blinked and then said, "She should be the one thanking me. If I hadn't risked my life to jump into that well for the antidote, she might not have made it." She apologized for even misunderstanding me back then. She looked at me with a genuine smile. "You really are a true gentleman." With each word she said, I edged further and further away. "Please, senior sister, stop talking before your grandpa slaps me into oblivion." But something felt off. Why was senior sister looking at me with such a suggestive gaze? Our rapport wasn't that high, was it? I quickly checked and bam! System notification. Nanggong Yue's rapport with you has increased to 62. What the? A 30-point jump just like that? If this keeps going, our relationship might start taking a turn I'm not ready for. Her words and the look in her eyes were doing nothing to help the situation, and Elder's face was getting red by the second. The veins on his forehead were about to pop. He coughed heavily, trying to get my attention. Desperate for an escape, I blurted, "Senior sister, your grandfather's cough sounds pretty bad. Should I go find some herbs for him?" But she just smiled, saying I was so thoughtful, but it's fine. The old man's just like that. A few coughs and he'll be back to normal tomorrow. The elder looked like steam was about to come out of his ears. At this rate, I was going to get toasted by his murderous aura alone. He cleared his throat again, this time more aggressively, and quickly changed the topic. "Come with me, boy. I'll give you a spirit beast. Then you can get lost." Finally, an excuse to leave. He led me to the back mountain, which was covered in lush greenery, a perfect place for a spirit beast garden. Inside, I saw all sorts of creatures, including a few mini wukong that curiously eyed us as we walked by. Whoa, this place is full of treasures. What should I pick? Seeing my expression, the elder couldn't help but look smug, asking me how about this spirit beast garden, as he believed it was not much worse than what the beast taming sect has. I quickly gave him a thumbs up, saying this spirit beast garden is quite good, but for some reason my answer didn't seem to satisfy him. "Quite good?" He narrowed his eyes, clearly expecting more. He asked me if I'd seen something better. Man, this old guy's got a real competitive streak, I thought. Wait a second. What if I rile him up a bit? Maybe he'll give me something even better. I casually mentioned to the elder, I heard the beast-taming sect's garden has an incredible variety of spirit beasts. It's on a whole different level compared to most gardens. He believed that the beast-taming sect relied on quantity, while his own garden is known for quality. I looked around, stroking my chin. Well, with all due respect, elder, I don't see any Foundation establishment-level beasts around here. That did it. He grabbed me by the collar, his face turning red with anger. You little brat! Who said I only raised chi-refining stage spirit beasts? The ones out here are just the weakest. The deeper you go, the stronger they get. With that, he dragged me toward the inner sections of the garden. Hook, line, and sinker, I thought to myself. This was too easy. As we ventured further, we saw more powerful spirit beasts. There were ones at chi-refining, Foundation establishment, crystallization, and even golden core, and even higher levels. Of course, he didn't take me too far in saying the pressure from those higher-level beasts could probably squash me flat. He gave me a smug look, asking, So, do you admit it now? Impressed yet? Without missing a beat, I casually asked if he had any nascent soul-level beasts back there as well. Before he could reply, Senior Sister giggled beside me and whispered, He doesn't. His strongest beasts are only at the manifested spirit level. He didn't want to show you because he was afraid you'd tease him. His face turned bright red, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he quickly changed the subject. Enough of that! Pick a chi-refining stage beast and be done with it. Senior Sister, however, stepped in, telling her grandpa to not be so stingy, since I've killed a mid-Foundation establishment-level monster all on my own. She thinks that I should get a Foundation establishment-level spirit beast at least. It was clear he was reaching his limit with his granddaughter constantly siding with me. But before he could protest, Senior Sister grabbed my hand and smiled. Besides, Junior Brother isn't an outsider. She then began to enthusiastically introduce me to various Foundation establishment-level spirit beasts, describing each one's unique abilities. I was overwhelmed by the options. There were just too many to choose from. That's when a small creature waddled up to me. Its fur was black and white, and it was adorably round, looking a lot like a panda. But in the game, it was called an iron-eating beast. This little guy was a rare find in 8 Wastelands, and it had the potential to grow all the way to the nascent soul stage. I immediately scooped up the little iron-eating beast and decided, this is the one. But before I could celebrate my choice, the elder snatched it right out of my hands. Nope, not this one, he said firmly. He said he didn't have many of these left. He knew what I was thinking. When these beasts matured, they'd at least reach the nascent soul stage. Plus, this one was still a cub with plenty of room to grow. No way he was going to give it up that easily. But Senior Sister wasn't having any of it. She grabbed the little guy from his hands and shot back. This kind of spirit beast with potential is exactly what my junior brother deserves. Then, without hesitation, she shoved it right back into my arms. He's yours now. Just drop some blood on its forehead to make it yours. The elder tried to take it back again, but Senior Sister blocked him, hands on her hips, telling the elder that he always taught her that one must keep their word. Wonder if he really going to go back on it now. Turning to me, she urged, hurry up and do the blood contract. Seeing that the elder wasn't putting up any more of a fight, I bit my finger and pressed it to the creature's forehead, focusing on the bond between us. As expected, the little iron-eating beast resisted fiercely at first, mentally pushing back against the contract. Senior Sister stood with her arms crossed, looking smug. Well, now that it's bonded, Grandpa can't take it back anymore. The elder could only rub his temples in defeat. You really are your grandfather's sweet little granddaughter, huh? At that moment, I tuned out the world around me, focusing all my spirit energy on the little guy. The next thing I knew, we were both standing in a river. It was perched on a rock, looking down at me with disdain, clearly not convinced that a lowly chi-refining cultivator like me could be its master. I didn't get angry, though. Instead, I smiled and told it, if you accept me as your master, I'll take you on a journey where you'll feast on the finest delicacies, rare herbs, spirit fruits, and treasures beyond your wildest dreams. My offer wasn't random. I knew something important about spirit beasts. The iron-eating beast was a notorious glutton, easily swayed by the promise of food. While gnawing on a small dagger, it sneered, thinking that he had eaten everything and didn't believe I could bring him delicacies. Undeterred, I raised an eyebrow. asking him if he ever tasted the crystal bamboo forest in Muxian Prefecture. Those bamboo shoots are sweet and crunchy, growing in a secret realm. Surely he hasn't had those. The beast paused for a moment, then shook its head. I pressed on. Or how about the Tongshuan fruit from Penglai Immortal Isle? One bite can extend his lifespan by 100 years. Ever tried it? Another pause, another shake of the head. One after another I described rare and delicious treasures, and with each one, the little guy became more intrigued. Eventually, it hopped off its rock, now standing before me, unable to resist any longer. All right, stop talking about food, I'm starving now, it grumbled. So if I follow you, I'll really get to eat all these things? I chuckled, holding out my fist. Of course! It hesitated for only a second before bumping my fist with its paw. Deal! I'm in, master! Soon, I received a system notification. Taming successful. I could now view the little guy's stats, and even though he was still a cub, his attributes were already impressive. I patted his head and said, Don't worry, stick with me, and you'll always eat well and live large. He didn't seem as cocky as he had been in our mental exchange earlier. Suddenly, a game-wide announcement popped up. In 10 minutes, 8 Wasteland will undergo its first major update. All players will be forcibly logged out. The update will last 24 hours. My heart skipped a beat. In my past life, the first big update hadn't happened until about a month after the game's official launch. Why was it happening so soon this time? Could the timeline for the game's fusion with reality be moving up as well? I shook my head, pushing those thoughts aside for now. I needed to prepare. Walking over to Senior Sister, I thanked her once again and told her, I need to focus on training for a few days. I'll come see you after that. She looked a bit reluctant to let me go, but after a moment she gently grabbed my hand, nodded, and said she would come find me in a few days. I hurried back to the courtyard, where I set up a cozy little nest for the little guy, before entering my meditation posture to grind out as much experience as I could before the forced logout. Back in the real world, I heard my phone buzz. A text message popped up. My birthday is in a few days. Would you like to join me for dinner? A familiar figure appeared in my mind, no other than Snowy. As I recall those memories of Sister Snowy, it's like stepping back in time. She was 3 years older than me, however. She was my childhood friend. Snowy and I go way back, to the day when she wore braces and was relentlessly teased by the other children. They'd call her Metal Mouth and other nasty names, and sometimes even threw rocks at her. Every time, I'd jump in to defend her, no matter how many of them there were. Sure, I'd usually end up with a bruised face and a bloody nose, but at least they'd leave her alone. That's how our bond grew so strong. She stuck close to me after that, sharing her snacks and treats. Even when we grew up and moved to different cities, she never stopped calling, and we kept seeing each other regularly. When my parents passed away, she was my guiding light in those dark days. But then came that day I stumbled upon her diary. I had always thought she saw me as a younger brother, but those pages revealed something deeper. She actually had feelings for me. At the time, though, I was too wrapped up in my relationship with Naomi to even consider it. Years later, I heard the devastating news. Snowy had married, but only a short while later, she took her own life. It broke me, and to this day, I don't know what led her to that decision. Now, standing on the streets of her city, memories flood back. It's hard not to remember that after this very birthday, she began to pull away from me. I can't help but wonder if this was the turning point. No matter what, this time I won't miss her birthday. I can't let her walk the same tragic path she did before. I arrived at the hospital where Snowy was interning, walking through the long corridor. Suddenly, a group of doctors rushed by, pushing a stretcher with an elderly man lying on top. A frantic woman followed, crying out, "Dad, wake up! Please don't scare me!" I didn't know it at the time, but this woman was Yang Yiru, the daughter of a shipping magnate. I stepped aside, letting them pass, but I couldn't help glancing at the man on the stretcher. His condition looked dire. On impulse, I gently tapped a few key acupoints on his body, something I'd picked up from my time in 8 Wastelands. To my surprise, it worked. The man, who moments before seemed to be on death's door, suddenly showed signs of life. His heart began beating again, and his eyes fluttered open. The woman's face lit up with joy, but the doctors stared at me in disbelief. One of them asked, "How did you do that?" But they didn't wait for an answer. They knew that the man's revival meant a higher chance of survival in the operating room, and they quickly wheeled him into surgery. I was about to continue looking for Snowy when the woman grabbed my arm. "You must know how to save my father," she pleaded, her voice desperate. "The Yang family is willing to give anything." Though I didn't know the details of the old man's condition, I could sense it was some sort of terminal illness. Only the mystical medicines from 8 Wasteland could help, but that wouldn't be possible until the game and reality merged. I shook my head, feeling a pang of sympathy, telling her I only helped stimulate his vital energy temporarily. The rest depends on the doctors. I wouldn't get my hopes up too high. He might only have about half a month left. I hated being so blunt, but I felt it was the right thing to do, even if it was hard for her to hear. She fell silent for a moment, then, in a soft voice, asked if she could lean on my shoulder for a bit. Before I could respond, she had already rested her head on my chest, her body shaking as she sobbed quietly. All I could do was offer her silent comfort. In my mind, I couldn't help but think of how this old man was like my parents, unlucky victims of time. If only they could live long enough for me to become the best in the game, then maybe I could save them all. After a while, the woman calmed down. She noticed the tear-stained patch on my shirt and apologized with an embarrassed smile. I shrugged it off with a laugh, telling her it's no big deal. I told her she should go spend time with her father and not leave any regrets behind. As I turned to leave, she suddenly called out to me. Reaching into her purse, she pulled out a bank card and a business card, saying, "This is a small token of her appreciation. And if I ever run into trouble here, just give her a call. She will help me however she can." I was about to refuse, but I could tell this was important to her. After a moment's thought, I decided to accept her gesture. I had no idea she was this well off. Turns out she's quite the rich lady. As I watched her leave, her earlier vulnerability had disappeared, replaced by the composed and determined demeanor of a businesswoman. Though I had been delayed, I finally made my way to the department where Snowy was working. She should still be here, right? Sure enough, when I walked in, there she was. Unable to contain my excitement, I called out, "Snowy!" Her body stiffened for a moment, frozen in place before a bright smile of surprise and joy lit up her face. After all these years, she looked exactly the same as I remembered, not a day older. Without thinking, I rushed over and hugged her tightly. It might have been the first time I'd hugged her like this, and it clearly caught her off guard. Her cheeks flushed slightly, but she didn't pull away. After Snowy got off work, we headed back to her place. As we approached the old apartment building with its worn-out exterior and cluttered hallways, I couldn't help but ask if she actually lived there. The thought crossed my mind that this place looked so run down it could be torn down at any moment. How could she possibly live here? Snowy just chuckled and said it was because the rent was cheap and it was close to the hospital where she worked. When she opened the door, the inside was just as old as the building itself, but everything was spotless. She told me to take a shower and relax while she made us dinner. I stood there looking around, and memories from my past life came flooding back. How she'd always sent me money from time to time, but I'd never realized she was living in such poor conditions. Watching her busy herself in the tiny kitchen made my chest ache a little. She could definitely afford to live somewhere better. Maybe she sensed my gaze because she suddenly turned around and asked, "What's up?" Then, as if something clicked, she added, "If you didn't bring a change of clothes, there are some in the wardrobe." I nodded and opened the wardrobe. To my surprise, it was filled with men's clothes. Snowy blushed a little and explained that on her days off she'd go shopping to kill time, picking out clothes here and there that she thought would look good on me. She said she'd planned to send them to me during her next vacation, but since I showed up unexpectedly, I might as well try them on now. At that moment, my heart felt like it was going to burst. After my shower, I changed into one of the new outfits. Just as I finished, Snowy announced that dinner was ready. The table was covered with all my favorite dishes. Out of nowhere, she seemed to remember something, grabbed her phone and said that since I'm in college now, I probably don't have enough money. She mentioned she just got paid and planned to transfer me some money. Before she could hit send, I quickly reached out and grabbed her hand to stop her. I explained that I didn't need it and that actually I'm doing pretty well financially. She gave me a doubtful look, clearly not convinced. She believed that I was only a student. How could I possibly have enough money? With a teasing smile, she told me not to try to fool her. In response, I picked up my phone and, with a few swift taps, sent her a transfer. A moment later, her phone buzzed and she stared at the screen, eyes wide as she read the notification. Her account balance had just increased by a full $1,000,000. "Where did you get this kind of money?" she stammered, glancing up at me with surprise. Then, She looked worried and said, "You're not involved in anything illegal, are you?" I couldn't help but chuckle as I picked up some food. I told her to relax between bites, meanwhile telling her that I earned it all in 8 wastelands. Her eyes widened in surprise. She'd heard stories of people making real money from that game, but seeing it in action was something else entirely. She believed me a bit, then started processing my words, saying she didn't know I could make this much. I nodded with a grin, telling her, so now she doesn't have to work so hard anymore. She took care of me before. Now it's my turn to take care of her. She shook her head, her expression softening but still resolute. She believed this was my hard-earned money, and she couldn't just take it. She even started fiddling with her phone, looking like she might try to return it. I stood up, pretending to be annoyed as I shrugged. So that's how it is, huh? You're treating me like an outsider. Fine, maybe I should just leave now. Her eyes widened in panic. No, of course not. I'd never think of you that way. Satisfied, I sat back down and continued eating. She still looked conflicted, as if she wasn't sure she could bring herself to use the money. I placed another piece of meat on her plate and told her to stop overthinking it. After a moment, she let out a soft sigh and whispered, "Okay." Time flew by, and soon it was late in the evening. I offered to help with the dishes, but she was quicker, stacking them up and telling me to go to the room and get some rest. I glanced around and noticed there was only one bed. With a playful grin, I asked, "So are we sharing the bed?" Her face turned a deep shade of red, and she playfully scolded me, calling me a little brat and asking what I was thinking. She said she planned to sleep on the sofa and wanted me to take the bed. I couldn't let her do that, but before I could protest, she firmly pushed me onto the bed, saying I was too tall to sleep on the sofa. Lying on Snowy's small bed, surrounded by the faint scent left on the sheets and pillows, I found it hard to fall asleep. After a while, I quietly got up and went to the living room, intending to talk to her about something. She'd already changed into her pajamas, looking quite defenseless. My footsteps must have woken her up, and she began rubbing her eyes, asking me why I wasn't sleeping. I sat down on the sofa and got straight to the point, asking her to quit her job. She blinked, clearly surprised, and after a moment she asked why I'd suddenly brought this up. I explained that I didn't mean she should stop working completely. I just wanted her to find a different job. I felt uneasy with her working so far away in the capital. When I missed her, she was never around, and if anything happened, I wouldn't be able to reach her quickly. I'd thought this through carefully. It was the perfect reason, one she couldn't easily dismiss. She didn't reply immediately, but even in the dim light I could see her cheeks turning a bit red. What I didn't realize was that Snowy was silently wondering why I was saying such heartfelt, almost intimate things. She looked both embarrassed and surprised. Not entirely sure what was going through her mind, I took her hand and asked her to join me as a professional player in 8 Wastelands. To this day, I still don't know what happened to her in my past life, but this time, I was determined to change everything. The next day arrived quickly. Snowy went to the hospital as usual, but my words from the night before lingered in her mind. She couldn't shake the conflicting emotions, unsure if she really should quit her job and follow me into a new path. When she returned to the break room later that day, she was met with clapping and cheering. Her colleagues were wishing her a happy birthday. At the front of the group stood a doctor with glasses, holding a bouquet of roses. He announced he'd reserved a private room at the most luxurious restaurant in the capital and would cover all the expenses for the evening. The room erupted in gasps and applause, with several people praising his generosity. Some even joked that with Dr. Jang being so bold, Snowy should just go out with him already. Snowy forced a polite smile, though she looked uncomfortable. She insisted it wasn't necessary for Dr. Jang to go to such lengths, especially at such an expensive place on her birthday. But Dr. Jang stepped closer, saying Snowy should already know how he felt, and that there was no need for formalities between them. What no one knew was that Dr. Jang's true plan was to impress Snowy and her colleagues, using the dinner as an excuse to get closer to her and hoping to take advantage of the situation. While I wasn't aware of his intentions, I'd heard the entire exchange from the doorway. With a smile, I stepped into the room, twirling my car keys. The room fell silent as everyone noticed me. Dr. Jang's eyes narrowed as he took me in, clearly surprised. He'd heard that I was broke and relied on Snowy's support, so how could I possibly afford such an expensive car? "Dr. Jang, you're here too?" He stepped forward and shook my hand, trying to maintain his composure. I met his gaze coolly, thinking, let's see what game you're playing, Jang. Afternoon came around fast, and as everyone clocked out, we all made our way out of the hospital together. Right there at the entrance was a luxury car parked out front, and people were practically gawking. Zhang looked like he'd just swallowed a lemon, completely thrown off by the sight of it. Then, as if a light bulb went off, he quickly came up with a plan. He mentioned that the car only had 2 seats, so obviously not everyone could fit. He suggested Snowy ride with me while he'd generously cover the cab fare for everyone else. The nurses were once again admiring him. I just shook my head and told him not to bother. With a quick snap of my fingers, several shuttle buses pulled up behind us. I told everyone to hop in and said, "See you all at the hotel." Then I opened the door for Snowy, slid into the driver's seat, and looked over at her. She looked a bit stunned and asked if I'd really bought the car myself. I nodded and told her, "Yep, it's hers, and happy birthday." In the car, Snowy hesitated before asking, "How much did this cost? Maybe I should return it." She knew I'd been making money lately, but she still didn't want me spending recklessly. I chuckled and said, "Well, that's why you should just quit your job. Then I'll hand over all my money for you to manage and there won't be any more reckless spending." She blushed and looked down, caught off guard. Soon, we arrived at the hotel, and man, this place was fancy. Exactly what you'd expect from the capital's top luxury spot. I played it up, acting super impressed, and said, "Wow, Zhang, you really went all out." He looked smug and replied, "Of course it's Snowy's birthday, so he had to make it special." Seeing me gawking like a total country bumpkin, he couldn't resist giving me a look that pretty much screamed, "Amateur." I pointed up to the top floor and said, "I heard the view from up there shows off half the city, especially at night. I assume that's where you booked the private room, right?" Zhang flinched, looking startled, but quickly nodded, saying, "Of course." But I could see the pain in his eyes. What I didn't know was that he'd planned to book a room on the second floor, which would have been around 10,000 for the night. But up on the top floor, the price easily multiplied tenfold. Still, he was likely calculating that if it impressed Snowy, the splurge would be worth it. We made it up to the top floor private room in no time, and soon the food started arriving. Everyone was thrilled, joking about how lucky they were to be basking in Snowy's glow. She gave an awkward smile, clearly a bit embarrassed. Watching me and Zhang chatting away like best buddies, she seemed less at ease, probably already thinking about how she'd owe Zhang a huge favor and planning to settle the bill herself by the end of the night. I kept my arm around Dr. Zhang's shoulder, laying on the compliments, saying how often Snowy mentioned him, how he was polite, humble, and always willing to help. He was eating it up, even saying it was just how colleagues should treat each other. Then, all of a sudden, he looked at me with a smirk and asked why I'd splurged on such a luxury car, especially since he'd heard my family wasn't exactly rolling in cash. I put on a sigh and said, "Honestly, it's a rental. Today's Sister Snowy's birthday, so I just wanted to make a good impression." Inside, I was chuckling. He was already digging for details, so I decided to play along for now. When he heard it was rented, his whole vibe shifted to relief, nodding as if to say, "Ah, a typical young guy trying to act rich." I could tell he'd initially thought I might have some mysterious, deep-pocketed background. Feeling pleased, Zhang called for drinks. The waitress brought over a bottle of red wine, did the whole decanting routine, and poured me a glass. Zhang explained that he'd had the wine stored here for a while, and this was some top-notch stuff, while urging me to try it. As I lifted the wine glass, Zhang mentioned that he'd originally been reluctant to open this bottle, but since it was Snowy's birthday, he'd made an exception to liven things up. But just as I brought the glass to my lips, something felt off. There was definitely something in this wine, perhaps some sort of drugs. I put the glass down and quickly acted, putting on a concerned expression. "Zhang, I only rented that car for half a day," I said, telling him that I had to return it soon, or I'd get hit with late fees. Then I stood up and politely asked him to make sure Sister Snowy got home safely. He jumped at the opportunity, eagerly agreeing, and I could practically see the fox's tail peeking out. I wasn't planning to expose him just yet. I wanted to catch him red-handed. What exactly is he planning anyway? As I left, everyone stood to make a toast, wishing Snowy a happy birthday, and she joined in, not wanting to spoil the fun. After a few rounds of drinks, people started feeling strange. One by one, they slumped over at the table, some even collapsing onto the floor. Snowy, too, finally fell forward, passing out on the table. Zhang was the only one still standing. As he slowly got up, his eyes locked onto Snowy, and he muttered about how he'd been waiting for this day. He lifted her up, and in her hazy state, she weakly tried to ask what he was doing, struggling but finding herself completely drained. I could hardly believe what this scumbag was planning to do. He even had his phone out, ready to record everything. Before he could do anything, I launched myself at him, landing a kick that sent him sprawling. The noise quickly drew in the hotel staff, who rushed over to find me pummeling him. He curled up on the floor, too hurt to even scream. Seeing him there, rage boiled up inside me, and with one last kick I crushed his balls. Taking a breath, I turned to the staff and told them Zhang had drugged the wine, asking for their help to gather evidence. They went pale at the mention of drugs, realizing how serious things had become. I wanted to finish him off right there, but I held back. Then, I pulled out my phone, showing him that I'd recorded everything. I asked him if he wanted to turn himself in or if he'd prefer I handle it another way. Desperate, he begged for mercy, promising to go to the police. I gave him one final glare and told him to get lost. As much as I wanted to end him, I knew I couldn't afford to let my emotions get the better of me, not with a game so close to merging with reality. I looked down at Snowy, who was still trembling, and gently lifted her into my arms. She clung to my shirt, whispering a shaky thank you. I felt myself calming down and told her that I was the one who should be grateful. She had always been the one taking care of me, but now it was my turn to protect her. Fast forward a few days, and I found myself back home, feeling both relieved and worn out. Holding my anger against scumbag Zhang wasn't easy, but I couldn't help but smile as I thought about the farewell before I left. Snowy had come to see me off, still a bit shaken but holding up. I wanted her to come with me, but she insisted she still had things to settle. I had no choice but to tell her to take good care of herself, and she promised she would. She also made me promise to look after myself, adding that she'd visit once she wrapped things up. Leaving her was harder than I'd like to admit, but I knew I had to get back. The update for 8 Wastelands had been out for half a day, and I needed to return to the game. Staying ahead was the only way I could protect the people I cared about and ultimately get my revenge on those 2 bastards. Tossing my backpack onto the couch, I immediately climbed into my game pod and strapped on the helmet. As soon as I was back in the game, I emerged from my meditation state and saw a notification. I had broken through to the later stage of Chi refinement, gaining a 10-point boost in attributes, plus 1,000 points in both health and mana. My progress during the update downtime had been solid, but I still needed to check on the item drop from earlier. From my storage ring, I pulled out a spirit-grade umbrella. Its stats were impressive, with a skill called Shelter that could link to a teammate within 20 meters, restoring a bit of health every second for 20 seconds. Another spirit-grade skill lowered the agility and skill accuracy of enemies within a 300-meter range. Finally, I found a rare treasure, a simple beast bone that had absorbed the essence of the earth while buried for a century, transforming it into something special with attribute bonuses. Overall, I was pretty satisfied with these finds. Next, it was time to focus on leveling up and stepping into the Foundation establishment stage. My unique talent meant there was only one path for me when it came to a major breakthrough, and it wasn't an easy one. To succeed, I'd need 3 different natural treasures and 6 spirit pearls of varying elements. I figured it was a good time to start gathering those materials. I got out of bed and spotted my little iron-eating beast curled up, snoring away. I gave him a gentle pat to wake him up. He rolled over, showing his belly and whining that he was hungry. Typical, this guy was always thinking about food. I teased him, saying he'd turn into a fatso if he didn't go on a diet. He huffed, grumbling that this wasn't what I'd promised him. I shrugged and joked, "Really? Did I say that? I don't recall saying anything." Then, out of nowhere, a notification popped up. Your pet's loyalty has decreased by 10 points. Current loyalty, 90. Oh crap. I'd almost forgotten that pets had loyalty levels. Regret hit me hard. I couldn't afford to let this slip. If loyalty drops below 70, a pet might start ignoring commands, and if it goes under 50, it could even rebel against its owner. How could I be so careless? I quickly patted his head, trying to soothe him, assuring him I was just kidding and that I actually woke him up to feed him. Hearing that, he perked up and trotted to the door. I followed him outside to the backyard, already thinking about the latest 8 Wasteland update. The big news this time was the release of new secret realms. The update brought 3, the solo realm Nocturne, the squad-based Ghost Cavern Ridge, and the Raid Valley of the Corpse King. All 3 were for players in the Chi refinement stage and had 5 difficulty levels, just like the sect missions. After weighing my options, I decided to tackle the solo dungeon first. It held one of the key materials I needed for my Foundation establishment breakthrough, and the gear from there was in high demand. However, I hadn't gone far from the backyard when, suddenly, a group of NPCs blocked my way. "So, you finally dared to come down from the mountain, huh?" one of them sneered. I glanced at their info, recognizing the leader as a senior disciple from the sword sect's inner circle, with late-stage foundation establishment cultivation. I asked them what their business was, keeping my tone calm. Without a word, he drew his sword, making his intentions crystal clear. He was here to challenge me. He went on to explain the sword sect's rules. As long as the challenger's cultivation level wasn't more than one full major stage below the defenders, they could issue a challenge. If the challenged party wasn't injured, occupied, or in meditation, they had to accept. I knew they weren't sharing the full story, but I didn't expose them. They continued to talk about this exact rule was how the sect pushed its disciples to their limits, which was why Tianyan's sword sect reigned supreme in Muxian province. I knew the rules, of course, but I wasn't about to take a fight without a reward on the table. I told them that if I won, I'd expect something worthwhile. The leader agreed, proposing a bet using sect contribution points. He had 886 points, which seemed fair by sect standards. They knew I was at a disadvantage. My contribution points were at 0 after spending everything I'd earned from my last mission. If my points went into the negative, I'd be expelled from the sect. Just then, a familiar voice rang out, telling me not to worry. It was my senior sister. She announced that she had plenty of contribution points and assured me that with her backing, I didn't need to fear losing. I couldn't help but feel grateful. Having her around was like having a secret weapon. The challengers seemed even more excited, eager for a bigger gamble, and pooled their points together. The leader, confident as ever, declared that if he won, he'd double the points back. They ended up with a combined total of 1,500 points and warned that I'd pay a steep price for daring to accept the challenge. Meanwhile, over at the sect's sparring arena, the elder announced that the outer sect disciple Chen Yuan had just won another match. His defeated opponent looked furious, while the onlookers buzzed with awe. 8 consecutive wins at late-stage chi refinement? That was impressive. One of the elders stepped up and, with a nod, said that Chen Yuan showed great promise in swordsmanship and offered to take him on as a disciple. Chen Yuan's face lit up, and he quickly bowed, overwhelmed with excitement. Just then, my senior sister rushed over and called out to her father. The elder's stern face softened into a warm smile. Chen Yuan turned his attention to her and froze, completely entranced the moment he saw her. Her father asked what she was doing there, and she smiled, explaining she was there to support her junior brother. The elder chuckled, assuming she meant Chen Yuan, and introduced his new disciple to her. Chen Yuan stepped forward, bowed respectfully, and greeted her. However, she shook her head with a smirk, saying her father had the wrong person. Then she pointed straight at me. I walked up to the arena slowly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that both Chen Yuan and the elder were eyeing me with a bit of hostility. The elder's expression shifted to subtle concern as he glanced at his daughter's enthusiasm. He'd heard whispers about me from his own father and saw this as a good chance to test my true skill by pitting me against Chen Yuan. Chen himself stepped forward, eyes fixed on me, saying he'd heard a lot about me and that he'd been waiting for a chance to duel. I waved him off, saying sorry, but I'm busy. I knew exactly who he was. In my last life, this guy was destined to become the greatest swordmaster. Instead, I turned to the challenger behind me and tells them that I'd already accepted his challenge. Both Chen Yuan and the elder looked stunned when they realized I'd taken on a late-stage foundation establishment opponent. The elder even gave me a pointed reminder that I could decline, given the level difference. The challenger's face paled slightly. He'd lied earlier about the rules, betting on me being oblivious to the rules. I smirked, telling them I knew the rules. But since senior brother Wang is so eager to donate contribution points, how could I refuse? The elder's eyes narrowed, a trace of disdain flashing across his face as if he thought I was getting cocky. My senior sister, however, was cheering me on with non-stop enthusiasm. I drew my weapon and asked, "Ready, senior brother Wang? Let's make this quick." He hesitated, eyes darting between me and my sword, before muttering something and lunging at me with sudden speed. If I'd been any less prepared, he might have caught me off guard, but in the next instant I vanished, reappearing behind him. "Impressive speed," I said, "but not nearly enough." I activated Phantom Step and followed up with a basic attack, dealing 1,600 damage in one swift move. Stumbling back, he gasped that he'd underestimated me and claimed he was about to get serious. I glanced at his stats. He still had 7,400 health remaining, In the blink of an eye, he launched a skill, a piercing beam of light aimed directly at me. Timing my counter perfectly, I activated my own skill, not only reflecting his attack but also landing 4 consecutive hits. Each one dealt 2,000 damage, and the force of the final strike sent him crashing outside the ring, unconscious. My senior sister beamed at her father, who looked stunned and teased. "He won! What do you have to say now?" The elder was clearly taken aback by my performance, but beneath his surprise there was frustration. He suspected his daughter was falling for me, and that thought made his blood boil. Without another word, he turned on his heel and stormed off, his robe flaring dramatically behind him. In the crowd, Xiazi had been streaming the entire match. She practically glowed with excitement, telling her viewers, just as she'd always said, that I wasn't using any cheats. The comments were rolling in, full of praise. Of course, not everyone was a fan. Some were clearly jealous, especially seeing how much Xiazi admired me. But I didn't know any of this was happening, so I didn't really care. Chen Yuan stood off to the side, gripping his sword tightly. He knew senior brother Wang was a well-respected figure among the sect NPCs. Even Chen Yuan was cautious around him. Yet here I was, having defeated him with a single move. He called out my name, catching my attention. "I admit, today, you are better than me," he said, adding that he would remember this and one day catch up. With that, he turned and walked away. I didn't underestimate him. After all, in my past life, he was known as the unrivaled sword god, Chen Yuan. He truly deserved the title of #1 swordsman. In my past lives, we barely crossed paths, but this time, I had chosen the path of the sword as well. That top spot was not something I planned on giving up. Senior sister walked over, her eyes bright with pride, saying my skills had improved again. I grinned and shook my head, telling her that she was the truly amazing one. If I didn't push myself to get stronger, I'd always need her protection. She pouted, crossed her arms, and asked, "What's wrong with her protecting me?" wondering if I'm saying I didn't like her being around. I chuckled, replying, "Of course not. But one day, I want to be the one protecting you, shielding you from everything. That way I can face your father and grandfather without fear." Deep down, I was actually thinking about how intimidating their aura was, but judging by the blush spreading across her face, she might have thought I was hinting at something else. She nervously fiddled with the hem of her robe and said, "I should know strength doesn't matter to them as much as I think. If she likes someone, her family will support her." A thought crossed my mind, and I asked if she had any free time coming up. She nodded, assuming I needed her help with a mission. I shook my head and explained, actually, I wanted to invite her to Fengku City, to listen to music, watch plays, and enjoy the flowers and moon. Deep down, I thought, with our rapport level at 60, this would be the perfect chance to raise it. She blushed, realizing this was basically a date. She said she'd love to, but with her father recently returning to the sect, he probably wouldn't allow her to go out in the next couple of days. I told her I didn't mind waiting. She nodded quickly and ran off, saying she'd come to find me when she was free. My heart raced a little. This felt like our first real date. As I stepped down from the sparring arena, Wan Ling appeared, waving and calling out, "Hey, big shot!" She'd watched the duel too, and went on about how impressive it was that even a late-stage Foundation establishment disciple couldn't defeat me. I played it cool, and asked her what was up. She got straight to the point. Her guild wanted my help to clear the Valley of the Corpse King on hard mode, but I declined immediately. They looked stunned and pressed for a reason, saying I could name my price. I shook my head, explaining, "The Valley of the Corpse King is a raid for over 100 people. It's not about individual power, it's about team strength. Everyone needs to be at least mid-chi refinement to stand a chance." I then trailed off. This only made her more anxious. I decided not to spill what I was actually planning, but added that even with me there, it wouldn't make a difference unless her team leveled up. Deep down, I'd almost mentioned an upcoming opportunity to rake in spirit stones. She then asked, "What about Ghost Cavern Ridge?" I thought for a moment. It was tough but doable. Wan Ling's eyes lit up, and she said I could name my terms as long as I agreed to carry them. I asked, "Will their guild leader be joining?" She nodded, saying of course. But then she looked suspicious, narrowing her eyes, asking me why I ask. I laughed it off and agreed to help. She warned me not to get any ideas about the guild leader, saying if her dad finds out, I'm toasted. I shook my head at the misunderstanding but didn't feel like explaining further. I had zero interest in the guild leader romantically. I was only interested in her money. Just then, another familiar face appeared, Wang Jinghao. Calling him an old friend was generous, considering he was more like someone I'd tricked in the past. With his usual enthusiasm, he bowed and offered me 3 million to carry him through a secret realm. I tried to brush him off, but he wouldn't let it go. Finally, I vaguely said I was busy, although I knew that burning bridges with him wasn't ideal. I needed a way to dodge this without making him mad. Thinking fast, I turned to Wan Ling. Before she could react, I pulled her into a hug, announcing loudly that I already promised my girlfriend. I made sure Wang Jinghao could hear, adding, "We're going into a secret realm together." Wan Ling froze, her eyes wide as I continued, "Isn't that right? And after I help you, you'll finally agree to meet me in real life, right?" I threw her a series of exaggerated winks and she stammered, lowering her head, mumbling, yes. Wang Jinghao looked suspicious. He reminded me that I'd once told him I was selling that bow to plan a wedding and that Wan Ling had competed with him for it. Oh, crap. I'd completely forgotten the excuse I'd used when I sold that bow. I coughed, trying to sound composed. Well, you see, when a rich lady came after me, not to mention how gorgeous she is, I decided to take it easy and break it off with my fiancé. Wang Jinghao still looked skeptical, but I'd already started walking away, dragging Wan Ling with me. Left with nothing to say, he cursed under his breath, but had no choice but to let it go. Once we were outside the sect grounds and away from prying eyes, I turned to Wan Ling, thanking her for playing along back there and admitting that I definitely owed her one this time. She looked down with a small smile tugging at her lips, telling me not to worry about it. Before long, we arrived at the entrance of the secret realm. The area was bustling with players from various sects, all shouting for teammates and calling out which roles they still needed to fill in their groups. Looking at the crowd, it was clear everyone was progressing fast. Wan Ling spotted the guild leader and rushed over. A few other women turned to see who was coming, and when they noticed me following behind, Zhang Luoyu, the guild leader, quickly approached. She thanked me for agreeing to help and told me to name my terms. First, I need full command. Once we're inside, everyone must follow my instructions. Second, any sword cultivator gear or materials needed for the Heavenly Tao Foundation establishment are mine. And as for the third term, I leaned in and whispered to her, I'd like to borrow some spirit stones, as many as you're willing to lend. She looked conflicted. Spirit stones were valuable for any guild, especially now that their worth had risen to a 1 to 180 ratio against cash. And with the game just launching, no one had mountains of spirit stones on hand. I reassured her that I'd repay 130% of whatever she lent me within 5 days. After a moment of thought, she agreed, lending me 50,000 spirit stones right away. After collecting it, I promised to pay her back within 5 days. Now, it was time to tackle the secret realm. I glanced at the rest of our team, a late-stage chi refinement body cultivator, a mid-stage healer, plus Wan Ling and Zhang Luoyu. The 5 of us were ready to enter. Just then, progress updates for other guilds popped up. Most had already cleared about half of hard mode, while we were headed straight for hell mode. They looked at me, eyes wide, as if I'd made a mistake. I shook my head and explained, Ghost Cavern Ridge isn't that hard. The real challenge is coordinating the details and managing the elite mob's relentless waves. Get those down, and we'll be fine. They still looked skeptical, but I told them to trust me and follow my lead. Deep down, I knew this place inside out, so I wasn't worried at all. We entered a dark, eerie house that set a creepy tone for the whole dungeon. The healer clung nervously to Wan Ling's arm, muttering that she hated anything scary. Wan Ling tried to reassure her, but then Zhang Luoyu pointed at the ground, her eyes glinting mischievously. Look down! There's a hand under your foot. Wan Ling froze and slowly looked down. The second she saw the skeletal hand, she screamed, and Zhang Luoyu burst out laughing, clearly proud of her prank. Listening to their playful bickering, I couldn't help but feel a bit exasperated. This was going to be an interesting run. They seemed to be treating this more like a field trip than a dangerous dungeon. Just then, we heard a loud foot-stomping sound echo behind us. We all turned, and from the dark forest, a figure emerged. It was a man, or rather, what was left of him. One of his eyes was a hollow socket, and most of his skin was rotted away. He looked like he'd clawed his way out of a nightmare. The sight was so horrifying that the 2 girls immediately clung to each other, screaming in terror.